Living life in total isolation was all our boy ever knew. He was a lone wolf drifting through the cherry blossoms without a single friend to call his own. But then, she appeared. Even though her greeting was basically a direct insult, it was the first time anyone had actually spoken to him. That one encounter flipped his world upside down. For the first time, the cold walls of his solitude were finally starting to crumble. Meet our boy Bakuryusai, a first-year student who is just a little bit sturdier than your average teenager. And by sturdier, he means built like a literal brick house. Everywhere he went, the whispers followed him, and everyone at this school completely misunderstood him. To them, he was not a person, but a walking mountain of intimidation that they wanted nothing to do with. He sat at his desk, feeling like a monster trapped in a cage of his own making. The massive muscles he had built were starting to feel more like a curse than a prideful achievement. Every simple action was a disaster waiting to happen. Just shifting in his seat was enough to shatter his desk into pieces, leaving him standing in a pile of broken wood and embarrassment. Eventually, being the school boogeyman became his new reality. He watched from the sidelines as students avoided him like a plague, whispering about the legendary muscle kings that haunted the halls. His daily life had become a gray loop of isolation and regret, and he was starting to think things would never change. But as he sat in silence, a familiar voice was about to walk right through his wall of solitude. A simple greeting was enough to send his heart into a panic, leaving him stammering out a response to the girl who finally noticed him. For the first time, the isolation felt like it might actually end. But that momentary peace was shattered by a booming voice that knew exactly who he was. Standing before him was Syakurezuki Ganzuki, a name that carried enough weight to make any regular student at this school tremble in fear. One of the legendary four muscle kings had cornered him, mocking his lonely lunch as the girl watched from the hallway in shock. Ganzuki demanded to know why a nobody like you would dare to challenge the kings, turning a misunderstanding into a violent confrontation that Yu was completely unprepared for. The entire class was in a state of pure panic. Students scrambled for the exits, terrified of getting caught in the crossfire as Ganzuki prepared to tear Yu apart. But things didn't go according to plan. As Ganzuki attacked, Yu's sheer mass and reflexes took over, accidentally launching the Muscle King across the room with devastating force. Realizing things were spiraling out of control, the girl grabbed Yu's arm to snap him out of it. She screamed for the idiot macho to stop before he completely destroyed the school. Yu could only stare at the rubble in disbelief. He had just crushed a legendary fighter by accident, and while he felt like a monster, the girl's calm reaction suggested she saw something different in him. Yu thanked Sujizono for stepping in, admitting he was terrified of actually getting hit, but she wasn't looking for gratitude, especially since the whole situation made her look like she was actually helping the bully. He couldn't help but smile, genuinely happy that someone had finally spoken to him. However, his expression only seemed to weird her out even more. She decided she had enough of the awkwardness and headed back to class. Yu tried to apologize, but she cut him off with a click of her tongue, clearly finished with the conversation. When Yu tried to claim he was just a weakling who couldn't handle himself, she snapped. She told him to quit making excuses and start acting like the powerhouse he was, or he would be isolated forever. Her parting shot hit harder than any punch. She told him exactly why he didn't have a single friend, making it clear that his very presence was an embarrassment she never wanted to deal with again. She made it clear that she never wanted him to speak to her again, leaving Yu to bow his head in a silent apology. Her words echoed in his head as he walked through the quiet streets that night. He realized that if he kept acting like a victim of his own strength, he would never be able to make a single friend. When he arrived home, he barely acknowledged the warm greeting from the kitchen. He was tired of making excuses for his intimidating build and was ready to finally start acting like the person he wanted to be. He brushed off the offer for dinner and went straight for his room, leaving his mother to watch him with a worried expression. He didn't want to hide from the world anymore, but he knew the road to change would be a long one. Standing before his mirror, he began to practice a simple greeting with everything he had. He was done running away because he believed that with enough hard work, he could finally become a normal person. Yu was determined to change. He truly believed that with enough effort, he could leave his monster persona behind and finally live like a normal student. But reality had other plans. The very next day he walked into school only to find the entire atmosphere had turned toxic. Someone had left a chilling message on the blackboard, ordering Yu to show up at the gym alone if he wanted to see Sujizono Haruko again. The rumors spread instantly. His classmates whispered that the four heavenly muscle kings were behind this, a group so feared that even the teachers refused to get involved. Yu didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the gym, desperate to save the only girl who had ever spoken to him. Yu burst into the gym and stopped dead in his tracks. Sujizono was tied to a chair in the middle of the massive court while a muscular figure waited in the distance. She called him an idiot for showing up, her voice trembling with fear. Yu stood frozen, unable to process why his classmate was being used as bait in his world of violence. The man behind the kidnapping finally stepped forward. Ganzuki had been waiting for this moment, and he looked ready to settle their old grudge once and for all. He reminded you of their previous battles with the Muscle Kings. This time Ganzuki promised that things would end very differently for the legendary fighter. Suddenly, an army of 50 students emerged from the shadows to surround him. Yu was trapped in a massive ambush, and his heart sank as Ganzuki began to lay his hands on the terrified girl. Yu could not believe what he was seeing. He demanded to know why Ganzuki would drag an innocent classmate into their world of violence. The answer was simple. Ganzuki was tired of losing and was ready to throw away his pride as one of the 4 Muscle Kings for a chance at revenge. Something inside Yu finally snapped. A terrifying pressure erupted from his body, forcing the surrounding crowd to back away in pure instinctual fear. The students realized they were standing in the presence of a true monster. While the others trembled, Ganzuki only grinned, thrilled to see the legendary fighter finally wake up. Ganzuki warned him to stay calm because any reckless move would put the girl in direct danger. He was not just looking for a win, he wanted to make sure the entire school witnessed the fall of the legend. Ganzuki revealed his ultimate trap. He wasn't just here to fight. He had the entire broadcasting committee on his side to stream the humiliation live to every student in the school. Sujizono watched in horror as she realized the scale of the setup. Ganzuki mocked Yu for his lack of foresight, proving he had prepared every detail to ensure the legend's downfall was public. The pressure was breaking him. If Yu fought back like the monster everyone feared, his dream of a normal life would be dead forever. He would never make a single friend again. Ganzuki taunted him about his old signature move, the Muscle Smasher. He knew Yu was terrified of showing that disgusting side of himself to the school, leaving him completely defenseless. With a brutal strike, Ganzuki began the public execution. He demanded that Yu shut up and lose, setting the stage for a one-sided beatdown that was about to get much more sickening. Yu was a sitting duck. He let them strike him over and over, refusing to raise a hand while the crowd of students closed in. Seeing him broken and bloodied was too much for Sujizono. She begged him to stop, her voice cracking as she witnessed the one-sided slaughter. She called him an idiot and told him to just leave. She didn't want to be the reason his life was ruined, but Yu didn't move an inch. Running away meant she would be the next target. He couldn't live with the thought of her getting hurt because of his own cowardice. Yu stood his ground, choosing to take every hit if it meant keeping her safe. He was determined to stay, but Ganzuki was already laughing at his desperate display of loyalty. Ganzuki mocked Yu's one-sided loyalty, pointing out that he was risking everything for a girl who didn't even like him. He revealed that he had been listening to their conversation from the day before, proving he knew exactly where to strike. He threw Chujizono's own words back at her, reminding her how she called Yu an embarrassment to be around. Ganzuki demanded she say it out loud, wanting her to admit that Yu was a disgusting monster that deserved to be alone. Sujizono broke into tears and screamed that it wasn't true, but her voice was quickly drowned out by Ganzuki's laughter. He was finally getting the revenge he had been dreaming of. Ganzuki relished every second of his torture. He kept Sujizono silenced while he watched his rival bleed out on the ground. Through the pain, Yu whispered a final warning for the bully to release her. Ganzuki just leaned in, mocking his pathetic attempt to resist. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. Yu's fury erupted in a massive burst of pressure, sending bodies flying like ragdolls in every direction. The blast was surgical. It cleared the area of every threat while leaving the girl sitting perfectly safe in the center of the chaos. Ganzuki struggled to find his footing, unable to comprehend how Yu could generate such raw force. He was so focused on the monster in front of him that he missed the observer lurking in the distance, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. High above the chaos, a mysterious observer watched the scene unfold with a cold, calculated gaze. He wasn't surprised by the violence, but the timing of Yu's outburst was perfect for his plans. This wasn't just a blind rage. Yu had masterfully flexed every major muscle group at once, creating a surgical shockwave that neutralized the threats without harming the girl at the center. As the dust settled, Yu stood alone among the broken bodies of the bullies. He had spent his life being the punching bag, but seeing them target his only friend finally shattered his restraint. With eyes filled with a terrifying intensity, he issued a final warning. He was no longer the coward they knew, and anyone who dared to touch his friends would have to face the monster head-on. Ganzuki screamed in a panic, desperately warning Yu that showing his true form would make the entire school hate him forever. He thought social suicide would stop him, but Yu was already prepared to lose everything to keep her safe. Yu made his choice. He would rather be hated by everyone than let the girl get hurt. He usually hid his true form to avoid the bullying, but those days were over. Ganzuki snapped and ordered his entire group to attack at once. Yu didn't flinch, promising that he was done going easy on them. This was his trump card. He began to channel his power into a single move, activating the ultimate secret of his muscle technique. He unleashed the Muscle Crusher. The massive shockwave pulverized everything in its path, sending the bullies flying through the air like paper. The thugs were left broken and defeated on the ground. Yu stood victorious, but as the silence returned, he turned to see the girl he saved break down in tears. Yu didn't celebrate his victory. Instead, he immediately apologized, certain that showing his monster form had just committed social suicide in front of the only person he cared about. As he carefully removed her bindings, he confessed his true motivation. Sujizono was the first person to ever treat him like a human being, and he wanted to be strong enough to protect that bond at any cost. But the rejection he expected never arrived. Sujizono was in a total panic, desperately trying to explain that her past coldness was actually a massive misunderstanding. Yu stood there like an awkward titan, still convinced that his true form was a disgusting sight. He waited for her to run away in horror, unable to process her lack of fear. Suddenly, she was inches from his face, her cheeks burning bright red. She demanded to know if this entire fight was just a trick to reveal her true feelings, and she seemed finally ready to admit the real reason she had stayed away. Yu leaned in close, but her voice was barely a whisper through the shaking. She was finally ready to explain why she had spent so much time avoiding him. The truth was a total shock. She wasn't disgusted by his form. She was embarrassed about her secret muscle fetish. Bro, I did not see that coming. That plot twist is wild. Yu stood frozen as everything finally made sense. All the times she acted cold were just a desperate attempt to hide how much she liked his physique. He tried to process the confession, but she wasn't finished. She accused him of not understanding how hard she had been struggling just to stay professional around him. Suddenly, she couldn't hold back and started admiring his abdomen and shoulders with clinical precision. She was losing herself in the details of his build, and it looked like she had finally reached her limit. Her face flushed bright red as she admitted she could not hold back her true feelings any longer. Suddenly, she lunged forward and latched onto his arm, screaming about how much she loved his perfect muscles. The rejection Yu expected had transformed into a full-blown obsession. She was completely out of control, rubbing against his chest and shoulders with zero shame. You could only watch in total shock as she listed off every single muscle group with terrifying precision. She begged him for a hug, overwhelmed by a state of pure muscle-induced euphoria. Yu was stunned that someone finally accepted him for who he was. Yu finally let go of his heavy burden, laughing from the bottom of his heart for the first time in years. The absurdity of the situation finally broke through his shell, making him realize that his life had changed forever. A week later, the bully Genzuki was officially expelled from the school. However, the victory was bittersweet because the footage of the fight made the entire student body terrified of Yu's strength. He sat alone in the classroom, a social ghost in a sea of empty desks. He was ready to accept a life of total isolation, until the sudden squeak of a chair legs against the floor caught his attention. Sujizono dragged a spare desk right next to him, brushing it off as a coincidence. She claimed she was just clearing space, but it was obvious she was the only one brave enough to stand by his side. She leaned in, suggesting that having an extra seat might eventually lead to others talking to him. It was a clumsy excuse to stay close, and while she tried to act cool, her next words were about to reveal just how much she truly cared about his future. She wasn't promising a miracle, just a possibility. Even if the rest of the school stayed away, she was giving him the one thing he actually needed, a chance. Overwhelmed by her unexpected kindness, Yu couldn't hold back his gratitude. The terrifying monster everyone saw was gone, replaced by a boy who was simply happy to finally be accepted. The entire school was still paralyzed by fear, but Yu wasn't going to let that stop him. He was done being a social ghost. For the first time in his life, he finally wasn't alone. After Genzuki got expelled, the whole school treated him like he was radioactive, leaving him in a sea of empty desks. But despite the isolation, things felt different this time. Even with classmates shaking in the background, Yu did not feel nearly as lonely as he used to. Sujizono was the only one brave enough to break the silence. She walked in and greeted him like he was just a normal guy instead of a monster. She even dragged a spare desk right next to his just to make him feel less alone. Yu tried to respond, but she immediately brushed him off and walked away. He figured his hope for a real friendship was just wishful thinking. He had no idea that the rest of the class was watching his every move with absolute terror. The classroom erupted in panic as students warned Haruko to stay away, certain that Yu was finally about to snap. Yu tried to maintain his innocence, but his colossal frame made even a gentle gesture look like a monster reaching for its prey. Logic was quickly abandoned as the sheer terror of his build sent the entire class into a full-blown retreat. While the rest of the room became a disaster zone of flipped desks and fleeing students, Sujizono stood her ground without hesitation. Her refusal to join the panic left Yu in awe, as she was the first person to truly ignore his monstrous reputation and see him for who he was. Sujizono tried to keep things steady, telling Yu to just head back to his seat before the next class began. But the calm was shattered by a voice calling out Yu's full name, stopping them both in their tracks. Suddenly, a flurry of wires lashed out from the shadows, binding Sujizono and yanking her away. Yu could only watch in absolute horror as his only friend was snatched right in front of him. The man held her like a shield, revealing he was there to settle a score with the rookie who crushed the Muscle Kings. The thug with the eye patch didn't care about logic. He just wanted fame, and he figured beating a monster like Yu was the fastest way to get it. You tried to explain it was all an accident, but the thugs only saw weakness. Sujizono could only watch in silence as the situation spiraled toward a violent end. Then the monster took over. In a blur of sheer power, you sent the entire group flying with a single swing, all while crying out apologies for the damage he was forced to cause. Even after the fight, Sujizono was still caught in the crossfire. She was less scared and more annoyed, wondering why she always ended up being the damsel in distress in Yu's chaotic life. As the dust settled, Yu stood over the broken bodies of his attackers. Sujizono assured him that the blame stayed with the idiots who picked the fight, but Yu knew this victory would only make his reputation even more terrifying. Yu tried to tell her the mess wasn't her fault, but Sujizono couldn't help feeling responsible for his ruined reputation. Even while bound in ropes, she managed a blunt word of thanks for the rescue. Yu was drowning in guilt, knowing the accident wasn't her fault, and seeing how much the blame was weighing her down. He desperately searched for a way to help. The guilt hit Yu like a truck when he noticed the damage. The ropes had been tied so tight they left a bleeding gash on her leg, making him feel like a literal curse to his only friend. Yu completely broke down, hunching his massive frame on the floor in a daze of self-loathing. Sujizono could only stare in shock as the most powerful guy in school had a total mental collapse right in front of her. By the next morning, Yu was trying to keep his head down and just survive the day. Sujizono ran to catch up and check on him, but the vibe was already shifting into something far more awkward. Yu decides the best way to handle the awkwardness is to just keep walking. He ignores her calls and heads straight for the exit without a single word. This weird avoidance becomes a daily game. He starts bolting at the first sight of her, leaving her completely baffled by his erratic behavior. Sujizono refuses to be ghosted. She launches into a high-speed pursuit to catch the massive runner before he can disappear into the crowd again. She finally manages to corner him. She is done with the games and demands to know why he is suddenly treating her like a total stranger. Even when he is trapped at his desk, Yu tries to deny everything. His guilty face tells a different story, and the conversation is about to get much louder. Sujizono finally loses her cool, screaming at him for acting like she is invisible. She demands to know why he keeps running away when she is only trying to help. The entire class watches the drama in stunned silence. No one expected the blunt girl to corner the most intimidating student in school and give him a piece of her mind. Yu can no longer handle the pressure and completely breaks down. He is not the monster they think he is, just a scared kid who does not know how to handle his own guilt. Fed up with the confusion, she storms out and leaves him alone with his thoughts. Yu is left drowning in regret as he watches his only friend walk away for good. He decides that total isolation is the only way to keep her safe from his violent world. But while he tries to protect her from a distance, the very danger he feared is already closing in. Yu's attempt at isolation had failed. Ganzuki had cornered Sujizono, turning her into the ultimate leverage to draw the monster out of hiding. Sujizono wasn't about to play the silent victim. She screamed at Yu to finally acknowledge the mess he had dragged her into. Ganzuki relished the moment. He mocked Yu for thinking he could ever truly distance himself from the people he cared about. The taunts about her resistance were the final straw. Yu stopped listening to the threats and let the darkness of his own power take over. There would be no more talking. Yu unleashed a wave of raw, unfiltered pressure that left the thugs paralyzed and the room shaking with his fury. Yu stood his ground to rescue Sujizono from the thugs. He promised to get her out, but the mood in the room was shifting fast. Sujizono met his rescue with a cold glare. She did not want his help and was not afraid to say it to his face. A sudden blast of pressure sent books flying through the library. Someone shouted a warning as the room filled with falling debris. Yu lost his temper and screamed at her in frustration. He finally admitted he was only avoiding her to keep her safe from this mess. His words only made her more angry. She wanted to know why he was finally talking after weeks of silence while a much larger threat waited nearby. Ganzuki laughed, realizing he was finally facing the warrior who had single-handedly crushed the legendary Muscle King. But the villain did not want a fair fight. He had a much more twisted plan to test Yu's resolve. Without warning, the thugs pounced. Yu stood like a wall, taking every hit to keep the girl on the chair safe. Ganzuki mocked his desperate attempt at protection, disgusted that a monster was still trying to play the hero. The attacks intensified into a relentless storm of fists. Yu was trapped, forced to endure a beating that was anything but fair. Hearing the thugs label Yu as a monster made Sujizono snap, and she demanded they explain why they were treating him like a beast. Amidst the chaos, Yu finally spoke his truth, apologizing for the weeks he spent avoiding her and admitting how happy he felt when she first approached him. He confessed that his distance was a failure of friendship, driven by a crushing fear that his very presence would lead to her getting hurt. Overwhelmed by regret, Yu dropped to his knees in a desperate plea for forgiveness, wanting nothing more than to be worthy of her bond. Sujizono was stunned by his raw sensitivity, but their emotional moment of clarity was about to be shattered as a dark shadow loomed right behind them. Haruko watched in horror as Sujizono stepped forward, placing herself between the monster and her wounded friend. Sujizono made it clear that if Ganzuki touched you again, she would never forgive him, no matter the cost. Ganzuki wasn't intimidated, laughing off her stand as he recited a sexist joke about women being seen and not heard. With a vicious backhand, he sent her crashing across the floor, brutally ending her attempt at a heroic stand. That was the final straw. Yu's mind snapped, and his body surged with a terrifying power as he locked his fingers around Ganzuki's skull. The room was about to become a graveyard for anyone standing in his way. Yu didn't just flex. He became a human grenade, his muscles expanding with enough force to turn the air itself into a physical barrier that sent the thugs flying. The onlookers watched in pure terror as he performed the impossible. By rapidly expanding and retracting his muscle fibers, Yu was generating shockwaves that defied the laws of biology. The time for mercy was over. Yu's rage reached a boiling point as he made it clear that hurting his friends was a crime he would never, ever forgive. He unleashed his true power into one final move. The Muscle Crusher was his ultimate secret technique, turning his entire body into a literal engine of destruction. One final blast of pure strength wiped the room clean, proving that a true muscle has no limits. As the chaos subsided, the true nature of his mysterious power began to reveal its most unexpected side. The thugs were finally down, but the real shock was Yu's body. Just touching his muscles felt like a wave of pure healing energy was washing away Sujizono's pain. Yu was already spiraling into guilt, apologizing for putting her in danger again. But Sujizono knew the truth. Being around him was a magnet for chaos, and she was starting to see the pattern. His muscles were literally doing the impossible. Her injuries were vanishing in seconds, proving that Yu was far more than just a guy who worked out. He was something completely different. Then, she dropped the bomb. She looked him dead in the eye and told him they weren't friends. The atmosphere turned cold as she prepared to redefine their entire relationship. They had only known each other for a month, making the word friend feel too small. Sujizono had a much bigger goal in mind, and she was about to set a challenge that would change everything. Sujizono isn't pulling any punches, challenging Yu to prove his worth by becoming number one if he actually cares about her. The request hits Yu like a freight train, leaving him completely stunned as he repeats her name in total disbelief. Before he can even process the sudden offer, she dismisses it as a simple joke and prepares to head home. Even as she turns away, Yu makes a silent vow to work harder than ever to finally earn her respect. He feels lucky to have met her, but even his quietest thoughts of gratitude seem to set off her Mako radar. There are still some unsettled issues between them that are far from over. Sujizono is not finished with him just yet, casually mentioning that she still has not forgiven him for avoiding her in the past. Yu is completely thrown for a loop, realizing that despite her blunt nature, she is the type to hold a serious grudge. The next day arrived, and Yu headed straight to the school infirmary. He had been absent the day before and needed to catch up on his physical measurements. He stepped inside and looked around, but the room was completely dead. There was no sign of the teacher or the school doctor anywhere. Since the place was empty, he grabbed a stool and decided to wait. He started worrying that he had accidentally shown up way too early for his appointment. Being alone with his thoughts only made his anxiety spike. He knew the drill, and he was not looking forward to everyone staring at his massive muscles again. He could already see the disgusted looks in his mind. To the rest of the world, his body was just a freakish mutation that did not belong in a normal school. His thoughts were starting to spiral. He never wanted a body like this. To him, these massive muscles were nothing more than a curse that separated him from everyone else. Suddenly, a cold breeze drifted in through the window, and our boy was not feeling great. He was about to sneeze. And apparently, a single sneeze was all it took to trigger a full-blown catastrophe. The force was so dramatic it completely shattered the sacred silence of the infirmary. His uniform stood no chance against that kind of power. It was instantly shredded into tiny pieces, leaving his massive frame fully exposed. The sound of the blast echoed across the entire campus. You could only panic as he realized the magnitude of the mess he just created. The sheer pressure of Yu's muscles had literally vaporized his uniform, leaving nothing but a sea of tiny black scraps on the floor. He knelt in the center of the mess, panicking as he realized he was now completely exposed in the middle of the school. Then, a desperate plan formed in his head. He remembered keeping a spare set of gym clothes in his classroom locker specifically for a disaster like this. Since classes were over, he hoped he could make a quick run for it without being spotted. Every second was a gamble as he reached for the sliding door, his mind racing with the terrifying thought of being branded a pervert. He just needed to reach his locker and get dressed before someone walked into the hallway. But his heart nearly stopped when the door opened before he could even move. The school doctor stood there, adjusting her glasses with a suspicious look as she felt a sudden change in the room's atmosphere. Yu barely managed to retreat into the shadows of the infirmary as she stepped inside, clipboard in hand. He watched from behind a cabinet, his massive muscles trembling as she began to scan the room for the source of the noise. Our boy was in a total panic. With his clothes shredded and his massive muscles on full display, there was no way he could just walk out without being branded a public menace for life. Luckily, the doctor was distracted. She checked the room for a missing student, missing Yu by mere inches as she walked past his hiding spot. Suddenly, a crazy idea formed. Maybe honesty was the best policy and the doctor would help him cover up this mess. But his chance to speak vanished. The doctor invited someone else into the room, effectively trapping Yu in his corner. His heart stopped when his so-called friend, Crush. Whatever you thought she was, because the situation is getting interesting. Sujizono walked in and this was a nightmare scenario he could not escape. Our boy felt his heart stop as his luck officially ran out. He was completely trapped in his hiding spot while the one girl he feared most walked right toward him. The doctor greeted her warmly, asking if she was finally feeling better after her fever. Sujizono apologized for missing her physical exam, completely unaware that a massive student was trembling just a few feet away. Yu watched them from behind a storage shelf, praying they would just finish their conversation and leave. Every second felt like an eternity as he tried to keep his massive muscles from brushing against the cabinet. He looked down at his shredded clothes, realizing that getting caught in his underwear would end his reputation forever. There was no way to explain his monstrous build without sounding like a total creep. Then the nightmare became reality as both girls turned around and spotted him standing in the dark. Their screams filled the infirmary as they immediately branded him a pervert. He clutched his head, desperately trying to block out the noise. Then he realized, oh, it was just a dream. Relief lasted exactly 2 seconds. Because his heart nearly stopped when he heard the doctor calmly ask Sujizono to remove her clothes for her physical exam. Sujizono complied without a second thought, slowly sliding her school shirt off her shoulders. Yu watched in frozen horror as the situation transformed into his worst possible nightmare. The doctor reached out for her medical supplies, her hand coming dangerously close to Yu's face. He pressed himself as far back as he could, praying the shadows would keep him hidden just a little longer. His face was burning with shame as he tried to process what was happening. He wasn't a voyeur, but every second he stayed in that corner made him feel like more of a criminal. The situation reached a breaking point when the doctor pulled out a measuring tape to check Sujizono's bust. Yu's eyes fixed on the tape, realizing he was 1 second away from a total social disaster. Yu's brain was short-circuiting as the situation spiraled completely out of control. If he didn't find a way to escape right now, he would be branded a total creep for the rest of his life. For a moment, he considered sacrificing his own dignity to save the girl from the embarrassment of being watched. He braced himself to step out and apologize, ready to face the permanent consequences of his freakish build. Luck finally turned in his favor when the intercom system crackled to life with an emergency page. The school doctor was summoned to the staff room immediately, offering a momentary distraction for his desperate escape plan. Yamamoto looked surprised by the sudden call, leaving her patient sitting there in total confusion. The heavy tension in the room shifted from terror to pure bewilderment as the exam came to a sudden halt. The doctor apologized and rushed out the door, leaving the girl sitting alone in the quiet infirmary. This was his golden opportunity to slip away before she realized she was not actually alone in the dark. Yu stayed perfectly still behind the medical dummy. He hoped his massive build looked like a simple school prop. Sujizono stared at the empty room, wondering why the doctor had suddenly vanished. He could not believe his luck had actually held. However, staying in the shadows like this made him feel like a total criminal. His heart pounded as the girl stepped closer to the hidden giant. Sujizono began inspecting the supposed model. She was genuinely impressed by the realistic muscle definition under her touch. Yu held his breath, paralyzed by the fear of being discovered. The situation went completely off the rails as she started poking his abs with admiration. He was relieved to be hidden, but the constant physical contact was pushing his sanity to the limit. Her suspicion grew when she realized the texture of the muscles felt oddly familiar. It felt exactly like her classmate. Yu realized she was seconds away from figuring out the truth. Instead of discovering his secret, she leaned in even closer, finding the cold surface of his skin strangely soothing. But as she pressed against him, he realized something was seriously wrong. Her skin felt like it was on fire. The exhaustion finally took its toll as she suddenly lost consciousness and slumped toward the floor. He stood there frozen, watching her lie motionless on the tiles while her face flushed a deep, sickly red. Her fever was dangerously high and she needed real help immediately. He decided to risk being seen to get her to a bed. He managed to get her into a bed and tucked her in, but the intense heat from her fever was becoming impossible to ignore. After applying a cold compress to her head, he realized he could not handle this alone and needed the school doctor immediately. He tried to comfort her with a quiet question, only to be met with a strange and desperate response from the unconscious girl. She started weeping in her sleep, begging for more muscles with a delirious intensity that left him absolutely speechless. Yu panicked and desperately tried to quiet her down, realizing her obsession with his physique was reaching a dangerous level. Yu could not believe his ears. Even in her delirious state, her obsession with muscles was the only thing on her mind. He decided to give her exactly what she wanted. If seeing a flexed arm would calm her down, he was more than willing to provide. But just as he was switching poses, the infirmary door swung open. The school doctor had returned much sooner than he expected. The scene was a total disaster. From the doctor's perspective, a giant beast was looming over a helpless, sick student in the school infirmary. The woman stood frozen, her brain failing to process the sight of her missing student turned into a muscle-bound freak. The silence in the room was deafening. The doctor walked straight into a literal nightmare. Sujizono was still rambling about muscles in her fever dream while you stood there, trapped in the most suspicious pose possible. From the doctor's perspective, this was not medical care. It looked like a massive monster was cornering a helpless patient. You tried to do some quick damage control, but hovering over her half-naked only made him look like a total predator. Even through her cold, Sujizono found the strength to shout at him and ask, "Macho, what the heck are you doing here?" After a long and painful explanation, the doctor had heard enough to realize the entire night was just one massive, muscle-fueled misunderstanding. She accepted his story, but the mental image of the scene was already burned into her brain forever. As the tension finally began to lift, Sujizono felt genuinely guilty for hitting him while he was trying to help, but Yu was too busy apologizing for the creepy situation he had created. The tension spiked when she started geeking out over his leg muscles, forcing a frantic lie about fish to keep the doctor from catching on. A cold realization washed over her as she did the math, realizing he had been in the room during her entire delirious breakdown. She leaned in with a hauntingly calm expression, demanding to know if he had witnessed every single second of her embarrassing behavior. Yu finally reached his limit and burst into tears, unaware that his presence was already branding him as a total pervert in her mind. Despite his reputation as a monster who crushed 50 men, his real nature was pathetic. He was just a gentle giant who could not stop crying after being labeled a pervert. They eventually left the infirmary together, walking through the quiet school halls. Even after everything, she did not seem to mind being seen with the most feared beast on campus. Sujizono admitted she felt a lot better, though the mental fatigue of dealing with him was clearly taking a toll. Yu was just relieved the crisis had finally passed. She could not help but tease him about his massive physique, questioning how a supposed macho man could ever catch a common cold. Yu took the comment personally and immediately went into a full nerd mode. He claimed his muscles were actually frail, making him more vulnerable to illness than a normal person. As he finished his ridiculous explanation, Sujizono's expression softened into something more sincere. Sujizono finally showed a bit of her softer side, admitting she was actually worried when you missed school the day before. But their quiet walk was cut short when a menacing voice echoed through the hallway, calling out for a legendary warrior. An intruder blocked their path with a confident smirk, and his aura screamed pure trouble. A battle-hungry fighter who wanted to crush the muscle-bound giant and claim the title of the strongest student on campus for himself. As long black-haired dude lunged in for the kill, Yu wasn't even thinking about the fight, as he struggled with something far more explosive. Yu lets out a sneeze so massive it literally deletes the floor. The shockwave is so strong it sends Sujizono flying back like she hit a wall. As a result, the dust settles and everyone is in shock. His sneeze was so violent they actually thought it was a secret move called the Muscle Crusher. Then, Yu tries to apologize for his cold, but Sujizono is not having it. She just stands there in silence, radiating a pure aura of absolute menace. Suddenly, the realization hits. His sneeze was so powerful it shredded both of their outfits, turning a serious fight into a total disaster. It was just another typical day for Yu. A month into high school and his massive frame was still scaring the absolute life out of every student in the hallway. The classroom was even worse. He could feel their judgment as he walked to his seat, wishing they would just see him as a normal guy instead of a walking disaster. He needed to find Sujizono and apologize for what happened yesterday, but he stopped dead when he noticed some strange writing carved into his desk. The message was a direct threat. Sujizono had been taken hostage again, and the kidnapper was demanding he show up at the counselor room for a confrontation. Yu immediately bolted, his massive muscles propelling him toward the meeting point at top speed. He was prepared for a brutal battle, but what he was about to witness would leave him completely speechless. Yu expected a dungeon but found a high-class tea party instead. Sujizono wasn't being tortured. She was being treated like royalty by a squad of guys in suits. He stood there in total silence, his brain failing to compute the surreal scene. The leader didn't even look bothered, welcoming him like they had a scheduled appointment. This was a fate worse than kidnapping. Being caught in such a frilly, embarrassing outfit by her best friend was the ultimate blow to her dignity. The hospitality ended there as the thugs suddenly closed in. They weren't taking any chances with the legendary giant, and their massive enforcer was ready for a confrontation. The leader leaned in with a mock apology, maintaining the facade of a true gentleman. Sujizono just stared blankly into the void, completely checked out of reality. He offered Yu a deal to walk away. He claimed that if the giant stayed out of their business, they would have no reason to hurt the girl. However, the negotiation took a bizarre turn. Suddenly he stripped down to reveal a polished physique, asking what kind of girl wouldn't be delighted by elite specimens. His entire squad followed suit, flexing their aesthetic muscles to mock Yu. They claimed their sculpted man looks were far more attractive than his monstrous and intimidating mass. You shouted for them to stop, but the leader just laughed. He told the giant to look closer, suggesting his friend wasn't as upset as she seemed. Sujizono was trapped in a wall of raw power, screaming for them to back off. You watched in horror, wondering if his friend was actually starting to enjoy the view. You watched in horror as his friend seemed to study the enemy. It looked like she was actually enjoying the view of their sculpted bodies. The thugs kept posing to show off their superior aesthetics. They were winning the psychological war without throwing a single punch. You began to spiral into a deep state of self-hatred. He convinced himself that his monstrous mass was nothing but an eyesore to her. He was certain that she had finally reached her limit with him. To you, it felt like their friendship was crumbling under the weight of his own muscles. The pressure became too much to handle. You collapsed to the ground in total despair, leaving the others wondering if he had finally lost his mind. The leader relished the moment, mocking you for letting a few aesthetic physiques shatter his spirit so completely. The leader decided the negotiation was over, placing a hand on the giant's head to signal the end of his mercy. A brutal strike launched the legendary giant across the room as the thugs declared the start of their twisted playtime. You offered no resistance, buried into the ground by a series of heavy blows meant to force his absolute subjugation. Pinned under a heavy boot, you learned his suffering was a requested service, leaving his friend to scream for the violence to end. The leader laughed off the girl's screams for mercy, treating her pleas like a minor distraction. He maintained his polite facade, promising she would stay safe as long as she stayed quiet. Sujizono quickly saw through his mind games. She realized the leader was only being kind to her to ensure that you would never have a reason to get angry and fight back. The thugs continued to mock the fallen giant's total submission, calling him a powerless coward who had lost his edge. Leader looked down at the broken giant with pure contempt, satisfied that his psychological warfare was a success. He leaned in to twist the knife even further, asking if Yu was ready to go back to being a loner. The leader wanted to convince him that his only friend was already moving on to someone better. Ganzuki then turned his attention to the girl, mockingly asking if she was only hanging around the monster for his wealth. Sujizono did not flinch, preparing to tell the leader exactly what he was getting wrong. The blonde leader assumed the girl stayed with Yu out of fear, mocking the giant as he lay face down in the dirt. He tried to play the hero, offering her a false escape from her supposed monster companion. But he was not expecting a counterattack. Before he could finish his sentence, a brutal kick slammed into his face, shattering his perfect aesthetic and leaving his men in a state of pure shock. The impact sent the leader flying as he screamed in agony, completely unable to process how his prisoner had suddenly turned the tables. Sujizono landed gracefully, her quiet patience finally reaching its limit. She mockingly explained that his treatment was so weak that she easily broke free from her restraints. The surrounding thugs could only watch in silence as she prepared to address the leader's delusions of grandeur. Blonde crawled back to his feet, bloodied and desperate to understand why she was not impressed by his fine macho physique. He demanded to know what made her so dissatisfied, unaware that she was about to deliver a savage verbal beatdown. Sujizono didn't stop at the kick, pointing a finger at the entire gang and declaring their physiques an absolute zero. The thugs were genuinely offended, unable to process the fact that their hard-earned gains were being dismissed as a bad joke. She singled out the fighters one by one, calling their muscles a protein-fueled lie that lacked any actual foundation. Her verbal assault continued until the once proud group was reduced to a pile of sobbing, broken messes on the floor. Leader finally snapped, grabbing her by the face to try and silence the insults that had utterly crushed his men's spirits. She didn't back down, daring the leader to try and hurt her with his pathetic strength. Sujizono wasn't done yet, mockingly inviting Blonde Macho to land a hit since his weak muscles wouldn't even cause her an itch. That was the final straw for the leader, whose ego finally snapped as he lunged forward to silence her for good. He threw a punch with everything he had, but before he could connect, a violent shockwave erupted from thin air to block the strike. Yu had reached his absolute limit, his sheer emotional distress manifesting as a physical force that rattled the entire room. The surrounding thugs could only watch in terror, unable to comprehend how a human body could produce a literal explosion of pressure. Yu looked back at Sujizono with a heavy heart, apologizing for dragging her into his chaotic world once again. He offered himself up as a human shield, telling the thugs they could beat him as much as they wanted. However, his mercy had a very clear limit. He roared a terrifying warning to the gang, promising that he would never forgive anyone who tried to hurt his friend. The sheer force of his rage broke the thugs' spirits instantly, sending them running in a blind panic. Blonde could only watch in shock. Blonde finally understood the warnings he had heard about the hidden nature of the boy. Pushing Yu to his breaking point was a mistake that guaranteed an absolute defeat. Yu stood his ground against the blonde, his voice cold as he refused to accept any more of this madness. He took a deep breath, sensing a strange wave of excitement beginning to ripple through the room. The thugs completely ignored the heavy atmosphere. They charged in with a wild roar, believing their own macho bodies were still the top dogs in this room. Then, the air itself seemed to shatter. Without you even lifting a finger, a violent explosion of pressure sent the entire gang flying across the room. The few who managed to stay on their feet couldn't even move. Their biceps and quads were vibrating so hard it felt like their skin was about to tear off. It was a level of fear that defied logic. Their own muscles were physically recoiling, literally terrified of the monstrous presence Yu was emitting. As they watched in horror, Yu's body began to warp and expand. Yu finally snapped, unleashing a secret technique that defies the laws of nature. This was the legendary Muscle Crusher, a move so powerful it sent everyone in the room flying like ragdolls. Once the dust settled, Sujizono was not impressed by the display. She confronted the trembling Yu, offended that he ever thought she would be swayed by some random thugs just because they had decent physiques. She explained that her standards were far higher than he realized. Yu tried to apologize for the misunderstanding, but the intensity in her gaze was actually starting to terrify him. She blurted out that since he already knew about her muscle fetish, she clearly had the best eyes for appreciating them. Yu finally felt at peace now that they were on the same page. Sujizono snuggled into his massive arm, jokingly claiming she only liked him for his gains, which left Yu feeling more determined than ever. With their mutual understanding finally reached, Yu felt a sense of peace he had never known before. He realized that since Sujizono truly accepted him, he needed to work even harder to become a man worthy of her respect. Caught up in the moment, he couldn't help but tell her that she looked absolutely adorable in her current getup. The sudden compliment hit her like a freight train, leaving her completely red-faced and speechless. It turned out she had been so focused on their conversation that she completely forgot she was still wearing the elaborate noblewoman costume. The tender atmosphere shattered as she began to scramble, mortified that she'd been parading around in such a ridiculous outfit. However, the peaceful scene was cut short by a sudden, booming voice that echoed through the room. A new girl arrived with a dramatic flair, declaring that letting the story end on a happy note would be a massive mistake. This was the secret leader of the thugs you had just embarrassed, and she was clearly looking for payback. She didn't even wait for a response, winding up a strike that was destined to collide with Yu's immovable defense head-on. She thought her punch would do something, but hitting Yu's arm was like punching a mountain. The force of her own momentum backfired instantly, launching her into the air before she could even blink. Even after getting completely folded, she was still yelling threats and refusing to accept the L. Her squad of thugs panicked as they caught their lady, terrified that their fearless leader had just been neutralized by a single flex. Yu and Sujizono were left standing there in total confusion, having no clue why this girl was even tweaking. The thugs didn't wait to explain, hauling their boss away to the hospital as their desperate cries of "My lady" faded into the distance. Inside a quiet classroom, the Mako boss officially kicked off her plan for revenge, declaring that the strategy meeting to take down Yu had finally begun. The Mako boss was officially done following student council rules, claiming that her status as an officer gave her the right to do whatever she wanted. Her squad was still in shambles after getting folded by Yu, mourning their lost pride as if the world was ending right then and there. Fed up with their weakness, she hopped onto a desk and pointed directly at Yu, swearing that he was an existence that simply had to be brought down. The atmosphere shifted instantly as she turned to greet Sujizono with surprising politeness, leaving the other girl stunned to see the same chaotic fighter from yesterday standing in the classroom. Instead of starting a fight, the girl surprisingly offered a formal apology for how her personal butlers had handled things during their last meeting. Her words weren't empty as the entire squad of thugs suddenly appeared in formal butler suits, bowing deeply to show they were genuinely sorry for their past behavior. The classroom quickly filled with whispers as the other students began to realize exactly who they were looking at. She made her identity loud and clear, declaring herself as Kurako Kinkira, the first-year student who held the title of Student Council Vice President. While others speculated that Kurako was one of the legendary 4 Heavenly Muscle Kings, the atmosphere changed as a new group suddenly closed in on Sujizono. Sujizono was completely blindsided as the squad of maids suddenly swarmed her, pinning her arms before she could even react. Kurako didn't leave any room for debate, declaring that their business would be finished up on the rooftop of the old school building. You could only watch in a cold sweat as the entire group sprinted away with his friend, leaving him frozen in total shock. Desperate for help, the students tracked down Dr. Yamamoto, who was immediately jolted by their frantic cries of an emergency. The doctor's soul nearly left her body when a massive shadow loomed over her, radiating an intensity that felt like a monster had entered the room. You didn't have a second to waste. He cornered Dr. Yamamoto, practically begging for the location of the old school building while the poor woman spiraled into a total state of panic. The doctor was seconds away from a heart attack, pleading with him to keep his massive muscles at a distance. Yu tried to explain he was just a lost freshman with no other options, but his sheer intensity was way too much for her to handle. He eventually tracked down the vice president at the designated meeting spot, demanding to know what her real endgame was. Kurako didn't seem bothered at all, greeting him with a cold smile that suggested everything was going according to plan. Her true colors finally came out as she announced a ruthless plan to have him expelled from the campus forever. She claimed his presence was a threat to the entire student body, backed by her group of elite brawlers. This was the Avenging Makos, a squad of fighters dedicated to taking him down once and for all. Yu prepared for a fight, but his focus quickly shifted when he realized someone else was watching from the sidelines. His voice booming with concern as he demanded to know if they had laid a single finger on his friend. Kurako didn't feel a shred of guilt, coldly reminding them that this entire mess was a direct result of their own repeated failures. Seeing Yu, there was too much for Sujizono, and she broke down in tears, blaming her own carelessness for putting them both in danger. The atmosphere suddenly turned heavy as a monstrous shadow loomed over the rooftop, radiating a terrifying pressure that even Kurako could ignore. You didn't need to throw a single punch, letting out an absolute explosion of raw energy that sent the entire squad of brawlers flying like ragdolls. The raw power of the shockwave was absolute, scattering the entire elite squad across the rooftop like autumn leaves. Yu was beyond reason, his features consumed by a dark aura as he roared at them for making his friend cry. Seeing her forces annihilated, Kurako didn't panic, instead shouting for her maid to immediately trigger their secret contingency. In a bizarre twist, the battlefield was replaced by a high-class tea party as the maid served a world-class Darjeeling to the distressed girl. The strategy worked perfectly, as the incredible flavor instantly melted the girl's anger into a state of pure, pacified bliss. The maid's secret plan was a massive success, as the high-class fluffy chiffon cake instantly transformed the chaotic battlefield into a peaceful cafe session. Yu stood there in total confusion, watching his friend's terrifying rage go from 100 to 0 as she entered a pure food coma. Kurako didn't care about the sweets, only seeing a golden opportunity to strike now that Yu's monstrous aura had completely vanished. But before she could move, a group of masked giants crashed the party, snatching Sujizono away before anyone could even blink. The leader grabbed a microphone and made a bold announcement, claiming they were using Yu as the hype material for their own grand debut. The masked intruder told the student council to be quiet while they prepared for their debut song, but apparently they forgot one tiny detail: treating Sujizono with respect. Then, because fate loves chaos, the microphone slipped and nailed her. That was all Yu needed. He reached his breaking point and unleashed his ultimate secret muscle technique, transforming his body into a massive wall of iron. The thugs tried to coordinate a strike on his stomach, but the vice president saw the terrifying shadow looming over them and screamed for everyone to run. A wave of pure pressure exploded from Yu's monstrous new form, pinning the entire elite squad to the floor before they could even move. On the ground, her elite squad was utterly paralyzed, their muscles locking up under a pressure so heavy it felt like the air itself was crushing them. Standing at the center of the chaos was a monstrous silhouette, a dark titan that no longer resembled a human student. Still, she refused to run, shouting that a dangerous freak like him had no place in their school. In a final, desperate act of defiance, she offered herself up as a sacrifice to protect the rest of the students. But as the dark aura finally began to settle, her fear was about to be replaced by a wave of pure, unfiltered disgust. But our boy had his priorities straight. Naturally, he rushed in to save the girl he loves. The vice president screamed for his attention, but Yu just blinked and offered a clumsy apology for the chaos. He realized that being treated like a terrifying monster had simply become his new normal. Unexpectedly, Sujizono agreed with the insults, calling Yu absolutely gross with a satisfied smile. She doubled down on the disrespect, calling him a girly crybaby who was way too delicate for a real fight. It was the ultimate flex. Sujizono was gatekeeping his kindness, and the vice president could only stare in total confusion as her brain began to short-circuit. The Mako boss finally snapped. She screamed at Yu to just disappear, her mind completely rejecting the reality of his monstrous presence. Sujizono wasn't having it. She called out the vice president for taking her insults way too far, but their argument was about to be cut short. A deafening crack echoed through the room. Without warning, the floor beneath their feet simply disintegrated into a cloud of splinters. The Mako boss realized her massive mistake. Picking a worn-down abandoned building for her final stand was the worst move she ever made. Gravity took over as the world turned upside down. As they plummeted into the darkness, Yu launched himself into the void to catch them before they hit the bottom. As they plummeted, Yu desperately reached out to snatch them both from the air. He pulled the girls into a tight embrace and activated his ultimate defensive move, the muscle shield. The technique turned his exterior into iron while keeping his core soft enough to absorb the incoming shock. They slammed into the ground with enough force to shatter the foundation, but Yu's body took the entire hit. He uncurled to check if they were injured, but Sujizono's eyes suddenly darted toward the ceiling in pure terror. The ceiling came down with a deafening crash, but Yu didn't even flinch as he braced his massive back against the falling slabs. As the dust began to settle, one of the elite squad members screamed out in terror, convinced that they were all about to die. Yu simply let out a long breath and admitted that the situation was actually quite scary. His casual tone while standing in a pile of wreckage left everyone speechless, their minds unable to process how he walked away from that without a scratch. While the others were still recovering from the shock, Tsujizono was already moving in to inspect the goods. She reached out to touch Yu's iron-hard muscles and praised his incredible strength, completely ignoring the danger they had just escaped. The Mako boss butler could only stare at his hands in silence as his entire worldview crumbled. Seeing the massive gap between their power levels was the final blow to his pride, and he finally admitted that her own strength had been totally defeated. The vice president demanded to know why Yu would ever bother saving someone like her, but Tsujizono was more focused on his injuries. Seeing the small trail of blood on his arm was the final straw for the leader, and her tough exterior was about to shatter. She finally hit her breaking point. The Mako boss completely lost it, bawling her eyes out in front of everyone as her tough persona vanished into thin air. Even while sobbing, she tried to claim Yu only saved her as some twisted scheme to look better. He completely ignored the shade, only caring if she was actually injured from the drop. Her anger finally melted into a deep blush. She admitted she was just glad he was safe, her rivalry with the monster student officially coming to a tearful end. Tsujizono couldn't help but feel like the whole situation was a bit off. Still, against all odds, Yu had managed to turn a deadly encounter into a weird new friendship. As the heat of summer kicks in, Tsujizono strolls into the room and drops a casual good morning macho on her favorite giant. Yu can barely keep it together, stuttering out a greeting while she moves past him without a second thought. But the peaceful morning is cut short when a voice calls out Yu by his full name, asking him to stop clogging up the doorway with his massive frame. It turns out the vice president Kinkira was the one stuck behind him, and Yu can't believe she actually spoke to him despite her obvious annoyance. The awkward encounter is interrupted as the teacher takes the stage, ordering everyone to their seats to discuss the nightmare of upcoming final exams. The teacher warns everyone that failing grades mean mandatory summer classes. Tsujizono is safe because her marks are perfect, but the pressure is on for everyone else. Her classmates waste no time in swarming her for help. They practically tackle her, begging the class genius to save them from academic doom. Tsujizono eventually gives in, proving that she is as kind as she is smart. Yu watches from a distance, feeling a surge of respect for her ability to handle the crowd. Seeing a real study group in action sends Yu into a total state of shock. He is so moved by the power of friendship that his massive frame destroys his desk. To his surprise, Tsujizono suggests they go to the library together after she is done. The thought of being part of her world is too much, and his emotions start to overflow. Yu's sudden emotional breakdown caught her off guard, leaving her with no other choice but to step in and take charge. She led him straight to the library after class, determined to kick off their high-stakes study session. However, the peaceful atmosphere was immediately shattered by the appearance of a terrifying, jacked-up bear. Tsujizono didn't even blink, casually explaining it was just a drama club costume for the upcoming cultural festival. Her classmates were still paralyzed with fear, certain that the bear's silhouette looked far too familiar. Tsujizono insisted that the only way for him to blend in was to hide his monstrous appearance inside a giant bear costume. The plan backfired immediately as his massive frame in the grisly suit looked more like a predator hunting its prey. Screams of pure terror filled the library while the giant beast stood tall over the trembling girls. Tsujizono did not care about the chaos and slammed a math book onto the table to get everyone focused. Once the girls realized it was just Yu underneath the fur, they finally settled in for their first ever group study session. While Yu was focused on his studies, a terrifying power was being unleashed on the other side of school. The mysterious challenger had finally located his prey, fueled by a burning desire to erase the disgrace of his past. He wasn't the only one seeking blood, as the sadistic Ganzuki emerged from the shadows to taunt his fellow loser. Both fighters had been humbled by Yu's overwhelming strength, and their mutual hatred was beginning to forge a deadly alliance. Ganzuki proposed a dark pact for revenge. Ganzuki's dark plans for revenge were already in motion. But inside the library, Yu's first study session was a massive success. With the group session officially over, the girls thanked Tsujizono before heading home for the day. Yu finally peeled off the heavy costume, admitting that he used to be completely terrified of his own classmates. Tsujizono explained that while popular life is a constant struggle, she is genuinely proud of everyone she calls a friend. Hearing those words touched Yu's heart, but Tsujizono's sudden shift in mood suggested their private session was far from over. Tsujizono finally dropped the act and declared it was her turn for a private physical education lesson. Yu desperately tried to reschedule for another day, but there was no escaping the obsession in her eyes. She did not wait for an answer before diving in, screaming with pure joy as she reunited with his massive physique. The library turned into an anatomy class as she obsessed over every muscle group through his thin summer clothes. She then demanded he use those monster muscles for a head pat. Tsujizono did not want a regular head pat. She wanted the raw power of his muscles to do the job, even if it meant risking a skull fracture. Yu gave in, using his massive chest and abs to rub against her head. It was the weirdest massage in history, but she was in absolute heaven. To her, those massive muscles were not just flesh. They were a spiritual healing ground that cured all her stress in seconds. Amidst the bizarre session, Yu finally gathered the courage to ask the real question. He wanted to know why a popular girl like her would even bother with a monster like him. She claimed it was just her way of saying thanks for all the times he saved her. But as she leaned into his arm, it was clear that her definition of gratitude was very different from everyone else. Sujizono finally had her fill of muscles and decided it was time to call it a day. Yu started to say something but immediately caught himself, making her wonder what he was hiding. She brushed it off and waved him goodbye, assuming their weird encounter was officially over. However, Yu reached his breaking point and shouted her name with every ounce of courage he had left. Discarding his social anxiety, he finally let it all out and declared that being her friend was the greatest gift he could ever ask for. But even as he spoke, his mind began to drift back to the person he used to be. He had spent his entire life being passive, swallowing every hardship and insult just to avoid making a scene. Sujizono had challenged him to stop hiding and become her number one, but he knew he was not quite ready for that responsibility yet. More than being liked by his classmates, Yu realized that earning her true respect was the only goal that actually mattered to him. As they moved through the empty hallway, he decided to stop beating around the bush and finally address the elephant in the room. He gathered his courage to ask the one question that had been burning in his mind, demanding to know where they truly stood with each other. Yu stumbled over his words, feeling the weight of the moment as he tried to explain his feelings. Sujizono stared into the distance and admitted that she was just as lost about their status as he was. He gathered his resolve and explained that she was the very first person outside his family to ever treat him like a human being. With a sudden burst of pure joy, he declared that having her as a friend would be his greatest dream come true. The raw honesty was too much for Sujizono, who suddenly clutched her face and let out a strangled cry of pure embarrassment. Yu panicked as steam literally erupted from Sujizono's face. He had no idea why his simple confession had caused such a massive system overload. She could not handle the raw sincerity and lashed out, calling him a terrible macho monster. Yu stood frozen as she tried to hide her burning face behind her hands. He spiraled into a pit of social anxiety, convinced he had crossed a line and ruined their friendship. Meanwhile, Sujizono tried to regain her composure, even though her heart was still racing. Their awkward moment was suddenly cut short by a voice reminding them they were loitering. Yu turned around, confused by the sudden intrusion in the empty hallway. But it was not a teacher. Rizaki Shaku and his gang of thugs had returned, surrounding them to demand a rematch and reclaim their bruised pride. Rizaki did not just come back alone. He brought a whole squad of like-minded fighters who were just as eager to see Yu face a humiliating defeat. The leader was completely unhinged, screaming about finally getting his happy ending. He was convinced that this was the moment they would finally send the sack of muscle flying. However, Yu was still trapped in his own head, panicking over his awkward confession. Sujizono realized they were in real danger and screamed for him to snap out of it so they could escape. It was already too late to run. The gang showcased their secret box formation, surrounding the duo from above to ensure there was no way out of this rematch. Sujizono felt a sudden, dark shift in the air as Yu began to loom over her. She grabbed onto him in terror, sensing that the gentle giant was about to lose control. Yu did not even have to think. His monstrous instincts took over, unleashing a single punch that obliterated the entire gang in a split second. The raw display of violence was so overwhelming that it left his classmates frozen in absolute terror. The fight was over before Yu even realized he had started it. He stared at the thugs buried headfirst in the bushes, completely convinced that a literal ghost had intervened to save him from the rematch. Sujizono could not help but snicker at how clueless he was. While she found his confusion hilarious, Yu was busy spiraling into a panic, terrified that the thugs might jump out for round 2 at any second. The absurdity of the situation finally broke her and she burst into a fit of genuine laughter. Yu just stood there in a daze, wondering what could possibly be so funny after such a terrifying encounter. With the tension finally gone, she decided to call it a day. She grabbed her things and prepared to head out into the rain, giving Yu a casual wave as she promised to see him again tomorrow. Yu prepared to head out, convinced that he had completely failed to address the awkward tension between them before the day was over. But Sujizono wasn't done yet, dropping a massive bombshell by asking if she could spend her entire summer hanging out with him. The invitation sent Yu's brain into an immediate meltdown, leaving him completely frozen as she turned and bolted away into the rain. As he stood there shouting her name in a daze, the stage was officially set for a summer that neither of them would ever forget. School is back in session, and that means it is finally time for swimming lessons. The girls are all geared up in their standard issue swimsuits, ready to get the day started. A few students are feeling those first day nerves, especially with so many new faces in the class. But the mood shifts the second a heavy footstep echoes at the entrance of the locker room. The entire room freezes as a massive wall of muscle blocks out the sun. Yu has finally arrived, and he is looking absolutely shredded in his tiny swimming trunks. The girls do not even hesitate before they start screaming and bolting for the exit. They are treating him like a literal monster, leaving poor Yu to have a complete mental breakdown in the middle of the room. Yu is left standing there alone, wondering why the other boys have not showed up to save him from the awkwardness. Meanwhile, the girls are huddled together in pure terror, praying that someone comes to save them from being crushed to death. The girls were getting legitimately heated, claiming that letting a guy like him roam around freely was a serious crime. They were totally overreacting, but the pressure of the situation was clearly getting to them. Sujizono just accepted the situation as something that could not be helped. Meanwhile, Yu was completely lost, his brain short-circuiting as he tried to process why everyone was so upset. But then he finally noticed her standing there in her swimsuit. It was Sujizono, and the sight of his friend like this caught him completely off guard. He instantly panicked, spinning around and shouting that he did not see anything at all. He was so flustered that his entire back was flexed to the max while he begged for forgiveness. She tried to calm him down, but the poor guy was in full retreat mode. He grabbed a towel and tried to cover up his monstrous physique, hoping he could just disappear into the floor. Sujizono watched his frantic retreat with a deep blush on her face. To her, seeing this absolute unit act so flustered was the most interesting thing she had ever seen. The rest of the girls were starting to come around too. They realized that Yu had a surprisingly adorable side compared to the other guys in class. The initial terror was finally starting to fade as they focused on his gentle nature. The instructor finally arrived and ordered the class to start their warm-up. It was a bizarre situation because the other boys still had not shown up for the lesson. It was just a crowd of girls and one massive student standing by the pool. But the training session took a sudden and painful turn. Sujizono was slumped over in a massive towel, looking completely drained of life. Her finger was wrapped in thick white bandages after a total freak accident. The girls were not letting her live it down. Immediately after the warm-up began, she had managed to slip and sprain her finger in front of the entire class. She was so mortified by the clumsy move that she just wanted the ground to swallow her whole. Dr. Yamamoto finally arrived on the scene, looking remarkably calm for someone standing in the middle of a pool deck. She tried to keep the conversation light while checking on the injury, but the peaceful moment was immediately ruined by a face full of pool water. The instructor was absolutely losing it, screaming for order as the boys started diving into the pool like it was a summer vacation. The girls were already over it, grumbling about how the arrival of the boys was nothing but a massive nuisance to their lesson. The instructor laid down one final warning about respecting boundaries before finally cutting everyone loose for their free time. Yu is submerged neck-deep in the water, trying to stay low. Sujizono spots him and asks why he is just floating there like a lost buoy. Sujizono sits on the edge, watching the massive students struggle to be invisible. Yu explains he is just trying to stay out of the way, but his wide eyes suggest he is still a total nervous wreck. In his head, this is the perfect disguise. He stands submerged to the neck, believing that as long as his massive frame stays below the waterline, he can pass for a normal guy while everyone else enjoys the pool. Sujizono isn't buying the act and bluntly reminds him that he is the only one standing perfectly still in the middle of the water. Yu is just happy to feel like a regular student for once, even if it is all in his head. Looking at his pathetic attempts to hide, Sujizono can't help but feel like an older sister dealing with a hopeless younger brother. Yu is completely blindsided by the comparison, realizing his master plan for anonymity might have backfired. While Yu is still processing the hit to his ego, another student council member joins the scene. It is the Vice President Kurako Kinkira, who seems to be trying to maintain her dignity while submerged to her chin. Sujizono calls her out, immediately wondering why the normally guarded leader is flying solo today. Kirako snaps back instantly with her face flushed red from embarrassment. She demands to know if being alone is somehow against the rules, but her defensive reaction only confirms she is out of her element. The prideful leader is clearly struggling to keep her cool in front of her classmates. She desperately tries to hide her shame behind her official title, by claiming she is just watching over the students. It is a weak cover story that fails to hide her stuttering and nervous energy. Even you can see through the desperate excuse to stay near the group. The mask finally slips as she admits that life without her maids is a total disaster. She has no idea how to function on her own, and looks surprisingly helpless in the middle of the pool. The high and mighty vice president is suddenly just a lonely girl who does not know what to do next. Sujizono sees her desperate situation and decides to offer a lifeline. She invites the stranded leader to join their conversation since she is clearly just bored and lonely. The student council leader was completely overwhelmed. Her pride finally gave way to raw emotion, but she declined the offer. Apparently, she wasn't about to be fooled that easily. Watching the scene unfold, you couldn't help but admire how kind his friend really was. But his intense staring was starting to make Sujizono a little bit nervous. A brief memory of a rainy day and a mysterious confession passed through the air. But before anyone could process it, you spotted a major disturbance approaching from across the water. A group of massive, muscular guys suddenly stormed into the area. They were shouting for someone named Bakuryusai and looking for a fight in the middle of the lesson. The leader of the group made their presence known with a deafening roar. They claimed to be the swimming club, a group of self-proclaimed elite muscles who were clearly not there for a peaceful swim. The intruders have no interest in following school rules. They bluntly tell the teacher to back off while they hunt for their target. Suddenly a girl with messy black hair lunges through the water. She snatches Sujizono before anyone can even process what is happening. The captors are thrilled with their prize. They plan to use her as a hostage to force their real enemy out into the open. Yu watches in pure horror as his friend is dragged away. Her cries of pain are the final straw for the gentle giant. Just as the situation turns ugly, the student council vice president stands tall. She commands the attackers to stop their assault immediately. Kurako isn't backing down. Even with the swimming club holding her classmate hostage, she demands to know why they have turned a normal lesson into a war zone. She is acting like a true leader for once. The motive is finally out and it is completely insane. These guys are not looking for justice, they just want a bigger club budget. Sujizono is floored by how petty this entire invasion actually is. The situation takes a bizarre turn as Kurako offers a handshake. Instead of calling for backup, she promises to give the club everything they need. It is an official alliance born out of shared spite. Kurako is totally losing it. She is so desperate to see Yu lose that she is throwing all school rules out the window. If you are against her rival, you are a friend for life. The betrayal is complete. Kurako points a finger right at Yu's hiding spot, giving the order for the club to move in for the kill. Sujizono screams in protest, but the spoiled princess has already made her move. Yu doesn't just hide, he explodes into action, sending a massive wall of water into the air that leaves the attackers completely stunned. Total confusion breaks out among the ranks as the swimming club realizes one of their own has vanished from the surface without a trace. The pool is no longer a safe haven as something massive brushes against their legs, turning their training ground into a terrifying hunting zone. Panic reaches a fever pitch as they finally realize the monster isn't just fast, he is hunting them from the dark depths where they are completely blind. Even with their fake bravado, the club members are completely oblivious to the giant rising directly behind them to end this nightmare. Yu is done playing nice. He is generating a literal vortex that pulls the entire club into a spiral of panic. They are supposed to be elite swimmers, but they have never faced a predator like this in their own territory. Deep beneath the surface, Yu activates his ultimate technique, muscle sonar. By sensing the vibrations of every twitching muscle in the pool, he can track his targets with perfect precision without even needing his eyes. The attackers are in total disbelief as they realize they are being hunted. It is a physical cheat code. Yu calculates the exact time it takes for muscle vibrations to bounce back, turning the entire pool into his personal radar system. Then, the surface erupts. With the raw power of his crushing muscles, Yu launches a massive strike that sends the entire swimming club flying into the air like they are nothing but ragdolls. The pool finally goes quiet. The elite swimming club is left shattered and gasping for air, unable to comprehend the sheer scale of the power that just wiped them out. The threat is neutralized in a single decisive move. The swimming club is officially broken. They are splashing around and screaming that everything they just saw was nothing but a collective hallucination, desperately trying to cope with the nightmare they just survived. The school day was normal until it absolutely wasn't. A sudden, violent twitch rippled through Yu's massive shoulder, signaling that something deep inside him was starting to change. He tried to keep his composure, but his muscles were becoming a literal cage. It felt like his own body was starting to rebel against him right in the middle of class. Sujizono wasn't about to let it slide. She leaned in close, sensing the raw power radiating off him and demanding to know if he was in actual pain. Then, things took a turn for the awkward. She wasn't just being a concerned friend. She was looking for any excuse to finally get a hands-on look at his legendary physique. The nightmare didn't end at school. Even after returning home, you realized the stiffness was only getting worse, leaving him feeling more trapped in his own body than ever. Yu's mother is doing her best to play it cool, but her nervous gaze says everything we need to know. There is no resting for the weary when your own body is literally pulsating with a life of its own. The next morning, a sudden shock wave rips through the classroom and turns the floor into total shrapnel. The entire room is an absolute disaster zone, and the students are too stunned to even process what just happened. Sujizono is immediately on the offensive, demanding to know if Yu is the one behind the massive explosion. The classroom is a total disaster zone as students scramble to save their unconscious friend. They are pointing fingers and accusing Yu of launching a massive shock wave that caused all this destruction. Yu is in total disbelief as his classmates treat him like a monster. He tries to tell them he did not do anything, but the girls are already backing away from him in pure terror. Sujizono tries to take control of the situation before things get even worse. She demands that everyone calm down while Yu stands there looking completely lost inside his own massive body. The gentle giant finally breaks down into tears as he looks at his own hands. He has no idea why his muscles are starting to act like a weapon he can no longer control. The air suddenly fills with a strange sound that stops everyone in their tracks. Kiriko Kinkura screams out in confusion while Yu's physique begins to ripple with an ominous new energy. Yu's body finally reaches its breaking point as a literal muscle explosion rips through the classroom. The force is so overwhelming that everyone can only watch in absolute horror as his physique reaches a terrifying new level. The pressure is too much for the room to contain, and Yu goes crashing through the window to the ground below. He lands in a heap and desperately screams for everyone to stay away before things get even more dangerous. He starts walking away with a physique that looks completely inhuman while Sujizono and the others remain frozen in fear. One of the students finally speaks up and asks if they are really going to just let him leave after all this chaos. But his escape is cut short as the student council enforcers arrive to block the path. The leader makes it clear that since Yu has gotten out of control, they have no intention of letting him escape. Sujizono tries to bring him back to reality by reminding him of the pain he felt yesterday. Yu can only beg them to let him through as he admits his muscles have become strange and are no longer following his orders. Yu finally confessed the terrifying reality. His muscles were acting on their own, and he had completely lost control over his own monstrous physique. It wasn't just a feeling. His body was swelling to an impossible size, turning into a literal mountain of meat that defied every law of nature. Then, the pressure hit the limit. A massive shockwave erupted from Yu's core, throwing his classmates back like ragdolls as his power finally went critical. But the blast didn't just cause damage. A mysterious white halo began to envelop the survivors, filling the room with a thick, ominous energy that no one could explain. The nightmare was spreading. This wasn't just Yu's problem anymore. The energy was contagious, and the students watched in horror as their own muscles began to swell out of control. Sujizono ignored the danger and sprinted toward the center of the blast. Yu was still standing, but he was wrapped in a thick steam of raw physical pressure. The pain was too much for his body to handle. He let out a gut-wrenching roar as his muscles reached a new level of insanity, leaving everyone frozen in shock. The student council realized exactly what was happening. This energy was not just a side effect, it was a contagious force that was literally boosting the strength of anyone nearby. The students felt the surge of power hitting them like a tidal wave. They were not afraid anymore because they finally had the strength to take the monster down themselves. But the order to stop was absolute. Before the mob could charge, a voice cut through the chaos and demanded that everyone stay exactly where they were. It was Sujizono. Yu offers a quiet thanks as Sujizono checks on him, completely oblivious to the crowd of students judging his every move. He knows the danger is far from over and begs her to stay back, but she is more worried about getting him to the infirmary. The group finally decides to give him some space, but their relief is cut short by a terrifying vibration coming from the floor. Every second is a struggle as Yu blames himself for the chaos, feeling his body reach a state of total physical collapse. Then the room explodes as another massive shockwave tears through the air, sending the survivors into a state of pure panic. The hunt for Macho was on, but the thick wall of steam made it impossible to see the source of the reaching hand. The situation was cooked, and the true scale of the disaster was finally starting to sink in. Back at home, the silence was shattered by a phone call confirming that a muscle explosion had devastated the school. Yu's mother remained completely oblivious, treating the terrifying news like it was just another ordinary conversation. But the command from the other end was clear. Yu had to stop abusing his power immediately before his body hit the point of no return. The warning wasn't just words, it was a prophecy. A terrifying weight hung in the air as she realized that something catastrophic was about to tear their world apart. Sujizono commands the room with absolute authority as the situation with Yu reaches a breaking point. The legend of Ma-kun takes a sudden turn as his physical power begins to fail him entirely. The transformation is complete, and it is a total disaster. Yu is left shivering in a cloud of steam, his massive muscles completely gone as he shrinks down to fragile state. Sujizono is in total denial, reaching out to grab his arm just to verify the truth. There is no mass left, only thin skin and bone where a powerhouse once stood. The school is buzzing with rumors, but the reality is even more shocking. Yu stands at the classroom door looking like a normal student again, and the entire class is frozen in disbelief. The whispers do not stop as he takes his seat. His classmates stare at his skinny frame, struggling to accept that the legendary beast could ever look this ordinary. Sujizono stands in complete silence, realizing that the powerhouse she once knew has officially been replaced by this fragile shadow. This departure from his usual pattern is a massive red flag, suggesting that his physical collapse might be permanent this time. Yu tries to convince her it is just a temporary phase, but she is not listening and decides to take matters into her own hands. Their exit is blocked by a massive man in a cowboy hat who seems personally insulted by Yu's lack of gains. Calling himself a 5-star bodyguard and a servant of justice, he makes it clear that he is the new authority in this hallway. Sujizono was stunned by the sudden arrival. This massive man had just crashed into the hallway, claiming to be a Texas native who was raised right here in the local district. The timing was a total disaster. With Yu's muscles completely gone, the intruder saw the perfect chance to strike and finally settle the score. Sujizono wasn't interested in a fight and immediately dragged Yu away. Behind them, the self-proclaimed bodyguard roared, promising to prove his strength with a single blow. They finally put some distance between themselves and the threat. Sujizono took a breath, hoping they were safe, while Yu struggled to catch his breath. Yu was filled with guilt for dragging her into another mess. He apologized profusely, but Sujizono simply watched him, her mind clearly on something else. Standing side by side, Sujizono realized something wild. She was now exactly the same height as Yu. The view was totally different. Without his mountain of muscle, he wasn't looking down on everyone anymore, and the shift in perspective was staggering. Walking through the hallway felt like being a ghost. No one was running away or staring in fear. He was just another face in the student crowd. Reality finally hit him like a truck. Looking at his tiny hands, he realized being normal was actually happening, and he couldn't stop the tears from welling up. But Sujizono wasn't buying the normal act. She lunged in and grabbed him, convinced his muscles didn't just vanish and that he was definitely deathly ill. Being at eye level with Sujizono felt like a total game changer. You could finally see the genuine concern in her eyes, making him realize that she had been by his side this whole time. Bro, you genuinely gotta keep her. Don't fumble this. Sujizono remained silent as Yu looked at her, his mind drifting back to the start of their journey. He could not forget that everything they had was built on the foundation of his monstrous muscles. Yu caught her staring and tried to brush it off with a gentle smile. Sujizono could tell something was off and immediately asked what was wrong, but he was not ready to let the peaceful moment end. The reality of his situation finally came crashing down. Yu admitted that this human form was just a temporary escape and that he would have to go back to his original monstrous body very soon. Before the conversation could go any further, they were spotted. The student council vice president stood frozen in pure disbelief, her brain completely shutting down at the sight of her shrunken hero. Sujizono is moving fast to keep the vice president from blowing their cover, knowing one scream will bring every enemy in the building straight to them. Yu attempts to explain his sudden transformation, but the reality of his missing muscles is way too much for the vice president to process. Everything goes south when the vice president breaks free and screams out Yu's location to the entire hallway. She is totally losing it now, laughing at the chaos instead of helping them hide from the threats closing in. The worst-case scenario finally happens as the Texas bodyguard crashes through the entrance, locking his eyes on his target. Chaos erupts as Sujizono tackles the shrunken hero to the ground, barely dodging a massive explosion. In the background, the attacker is already closing the distance with a terrifying roar. They sprint down the corridor to find an exit, but they walk right into a dead end. The Texas bodyguard is already waiting for them, looking completely unbothered as he levels his weapon at them. Yu is terrified, begging Sujizono to leave him behind so she does not get shot. He is frantically clutching her arm, but she is completely locked in, refusing to back down from the threat. Reality starts to sink in as the camera pans down to Sujizono's legs. She is covered in painful scratches and wounds from the previous clashes, yet she is still standing tall. This is a total role reversal. Sujizono lets out a defiant scream, making it clear that she is done being the one who needs saving and will protect Yu no matter what. Yu is a total mess right now. Without his massive muscles, he feels like a literal burden and can't stop apologizing for being weak. The self-pity has to wait because a rope suddenly snatches Sujizono and drags her right across the floor. The Texas bodyguards are officially in the building and they start mocking Yu for letting a girl take the fall for him. These guys think they are tough, but Sujizono calls them out for being cowards who can't even fight fair without their guns. Seeing her in danger changes everything. Yu finally locks in and stands his ground to protect the only person who stayed by his side. Standing in front of an armed killer while shrunken is a total death sentence. He knows he is a liability, but he refuses to let her face this alone. The fear is paralyzing, yet he forces his voice to work. There is zero mercy in this fight. A single brutal punch connects, sending him reeling. Without his monster muscles to absorb the impact, his fragile body takes the full weight of a professional killer. He skids across the cold floor like a broken toy. Sujizono is instantly at his side, her voice filled with panic as she checks if he is still breathing. This isn't a game anymore. The reality of his weakness is finally sinking in. Every breath feels like fire as he clutches his stomach, struggling to stay conscious. The cowboy looms over them, his presence filling the entire hallway. They are completely cornered, and the threat is only getting closer. She makes a split-second choice to protect what matters. In a final act of pure desperation, she lunges forward and pulls him into a tight embrace. She is done running. She is becoming his ultimate shield. A massive pulse echoes through Yu's entire body, leaving him frozen in total shock. His internal temperature is skyrocketing. He gasps for air as a strange heat takes over his senses, catching everyone in the room off guard. That's the power of girls touch my boy lol. The sensation is becoming completely overwhelming. He begs her to stop as his body begins to vibrate violently under her touch. Deep within his cells, his dormant strength is stirring. The memory of her obsession with his physique is acting like a physical catalyst for his recovery. The process is officially underway. Her warmth has jump-started his system, forcing his inactive muscles to finally wake up. Yu lets out a gut-wrenching scream as his body begins to overload. The sheer energy radiating off him catches the bodyguards completely off guard. He feels like his entire system is on fire. Sujizono desperately rubs his back to soothe him, but the heat is becoming too much to handle, and he was about to come hard this time. In a flash of pure power, the shrunken student is gone. Yu has fully regained his monstrous physique, towering over the room like a god of iron. The cowboy can't believe his eyes. Before he can even process the change, a massive shockwave sends him flying back across the hallway. The remaining guards are frozen in terror as they realize they made a fatal mistake. Yu is back, and he is not looking for an apology. This is a total muscle evolution. Yu has finally unlocked his peak strength, and the pure force of his presence sends every bodyguard in the room flying back. The cowboy cannot believe his eyes, screaming that this strength is not human while Sujizono celebrates the return of his massive muscles. But the miracle does not last long. As the smoke begins to settle, Yu's power vanishes instantly, leaving him even smaller and more fragile than he was before. Sujizono panics when she realizes that this time he is even thinner than usual, as if the transformation consumed his very life force. He is completely drained. By forcing that final evolution to protect her, he burned through every last reserve of strength and left his body trembling from total exhaustion. Yu is back to his tiny self and he is absolutely devastated. He is crying out in pain, barely able to process that his godlike strength has vanished into thin air. He is actually terrified that Sujizono will leave him now. In his mind, those muscles were the only reason she stuck around, and he is begging her not to hate him for being weak again. This is pure heartbreak. Even while he is falling apart, he is apologizing for being a nuisance, completely unaware of how much she actually cares about him. But the emotional moment is cut short when a chilling voice echoes through the room. A massive shadow stretches across the floor as a total stranger looks down at the pathetic scene. Meet Bakyosai Shoka, the ultimate older sister with an attitude to match. She is not here for a family reunion, she is here to remind her useless brother exactly where he stands. Shoka catches everyone off guard by bowing her head and apologizing for the trouble her brother caused, even questioning why a girl like Sujizono would ever be friends with someone so pathetic. Then she drops a total curveball, dismissing Yu's terrifying collapse as nothing more than a simple case of muscle pain. Sujizono is left speechless, unable to process such a casual explanation for his condition. The sister explains that his muscles simply used up all their energy and entered a state of atrophy from sheer overuse. She promises that with a few days of rest, his monstrous physique will naturally return to its peak state. But her tone turns predatory as she demands a full explanation the moment he is back on his feet. Even from the sidelines, Sujizono can feel the sheer terror radiating off the older sister's presence. Fast forward 3 days and Shoka's prediction proves to be 100% accurate. Yu has fully regained his massive physique, though the lingering soreness reminds him just how much he pushed his limits. Summer vacation started off perfectly peaceful with the sound of cicadas and local kids doing their morning exercises in the park. But the calm atmosphere was instantly shattered when a giant flock of birds suddenly exploded into the sky in a total panic. The crowd absolutely lost it as 2 terrifying silhouettes emerged from the trees looking like monsters from a horror movie. It turns out the monsters were just Yu and his older sister Shoka, who was currently roasting him for being a pathetic mess after a short 3-hour jog. She didn't have an ounce of sympathy for her brother's tears, coldly dismissing his total physical collapse as nothing more than a simple case of muscle pain. While their mother watched from the side with a happy smile, thinking the siblings were finally bonding, Shoka's cold expression suggested something far more intense. This wasn't just some casual morning exercise. Shoka made it clear that they were officially entering a brutal state of special training. Shoka is absolutely fed up. After being gone for 4 years, she returns to find her brother has become lazy, cowardly, and useless. As his older sister, she decides there is only one solution. It is time for a brutal re-education that leaves Yu shaking in pure terror. Yu's soul practically left his body as he realized his entire summer vacation was about to be spent in a literal training hell. Even through her predatory tone, Shoka dropped a heavy truth. Her brother had been in high school for 4 months, yet he hadn't made a single friend. Yu finally snaps and runs away, shouting for his sister to leave him alone. Shoka tries to keep her lecture going, but Yu is already gone, completely overwhelmed by her intense personality. This toxic dynamic is nothing new for the siblings. Ever since they were kids, Shoka was always the one in charge, constantly roasting him for being lazy and whiny while he could only cry. Her presence is absolutely suffocating. She stares him down with a terrifying gaze, ordering him to stop crying because she has zero patience for his constant weakness. Yu is convinced that his sister genuinely hates him. She is incredibly strong, and he believes someone as powerful as her can only have contempt for a soft-hearted mess like himself. He really wanted to prove himself, but he only managed to make her angry again. Now he is stuck in his head, realizing that he really is all alone with no friends to turn to this summer. Just as Yu is feeling the crushing weight of loneliness, a familiar voice cuts through the crowd. It is Chujizono, and she greets his massive physique with a single blunt word that cuts right through the noise. Yu is in a state of absolute shock, completely unable to process the fact that he is running into a classmate in the real world. He is a stuttering mess as she walks right up to him, demanding to know what he is even doing there. Sujizono looks completely different in her normal clothes, trading her school look for a cute style that is Yu's heart racing. He tries to make a break for it out of pure embarrassment, but a firm hand suddenly snatches his shirt to stop him. The peaceful summer vibe disappears instantly as Sujizono starts hammering away at Yu's back with a barrage of angry strikes. She is absolutely fuming at his reaction, screaming at him to explain whatever nonsense he just said. She brings the violence to a sudden halt with a command that leaves Yu completely baffled. She refuses to let him leave, but her reason is pure muscle obsession as she demands to keep admiring his latissimus dorsi. Sujizono doesn't give him a choice, dragging the massive guy away before he can even process the situation. They end up at a secluded park, a perfect spot to escape the noise and the judgment of the city. The shade of the trees feels like a literal lifesaver, and Yu finally takes a breath to thank her. It is a weird realization for both of them, seeing each other outside of school for the very first time. She gives him a soft look, asking if he is actually okay after everything that just went down. Sujizono was totally messing with him. She claims she was only there to talk to his muscles, not him. It was just a joke. Her sudden laugh and bright smile caught Yu completely off guard. Yu was basically a human radiator. Just as he started to relax, a cold voice called out to him from the distance. A weird vibe hit the park. Yu felt a literal shiver down his spine as dark hair began to drift down from the trees. There was no escape. His sister finally found him and she was already reaching out to grab him. Yu is absolutely terrified, and for good reason. His sister is not just scary. She is standing in the middle of a literal crater, radiating an aura that makes the air itself feel heavy. The embarrassment is finally too much to handle. Yu hides his face, wishing he could just vanish while Sujizono tries to make sense of this insane family training regime. Yu begs for a way out, but his sister is not having any of it. Her cold gaze makes one thing very clear. This is not a conversation, and there is nowhere left to run. Suddenly, the tension is cut by an arrival from a completely different world. Kinkura-san enters the park with a parasol and a maid, acting like she is on a casual stroll through her own personal garden. The peace does not last for a single second. Yu is sent flying with a massive shockwave as the brutal training continues, leaving the new arrivals completely stunned by the violence. Yu is breaking down, terrified of his sister's brutal training and the rising number of victims. But out of nowhere, a calm voice calls out his full name, stopping the chaos dead in its tracks. The mood shifts instantly as a pack of massive bodybuilders swarms the park, claiming to be from the bodybuilding club. Yu and Sujizono are left speechless as these total strangers act like they are long-lost friends. These guys aren't here for a friendly chat. They view Yu as their ultimate rival and believe this chance meeting in the park is a sign of pure destiny. The situation turns hostile in a heartbeat when the club members grab Sujizono. They are using her as leverage, demanding that Yu let them beat him senseless in exchange for her safety. They aren't stopping there. The bodybuilders set their sights on Yu's sister, calling her a beauty and declaring she is exactly their type. They have officially picked the worst possible targets to mess with. Yu is paralyzed with shock as his sister singles him out in front of the massive bodybuilding club. Shoko is absolutely livid, screaming at her brother for trying to run away from her training twice in one day. The emotional dam finally breaks as Yu screams out his deepest fear, asking if his sister just genuinely hates him. Sujizono tries to bring some logic to the situation, while the sister starts to process Yu's heartbreaking confession. The atmosphere turns deathly cold as a dark shadow masks her face, leaving her true thoughts a complete mystery. The bodybuilding leader is losing his mind over being ignored. He unleashes a pose so intense it creates a literal vortex of power behind him. It is a total ambush. While one meathead claims the title of strongest, Yu is caught in a brutal headlock that sends his friends into a panic. They are moving like a total blur now. The club members are throwing their weight around, completely oblivious to the fact that they just crossed a line. The atmosphere in the park just turned lethal. Shoko is gone, and in her place is a demonic shadow with glowing white eyes and a terrifying grin. They messed with the wrong family. Shoko is letting out a scream that feels like a physical shockwave, and she is officially out for blood. The bodybuilding leader is officially losing his grip, screaming about his hostage as the siblings close in with lethal intent. Shoko doesn't care about their threats, demanding to know why these thugs would ever try to steal the happiness she saw on Sujizono's face. Then it happens. The secret technique of the muscle siblings triggers a literal explosion that blows every single meathead away. As the dust finally settles, Shoko drops her aggressive act to apologize for underestimating just how much Yu has grown over the years. With a rare, gentle smile, she delivers the final verdict. Yu passed her test because his muscles are already stronger than she ever imagined. Shoka finally calls it a day and walks off, leaving Sujizono to wonder if she has actually grown at all during this chaos. But some things never change. To Sujizono, Yu is still the exact same guy she met on day one, always honest and always working himself to the bone. The park grows quiet as summer officially comes to a close for both of them. Without even fully understanding each other, it is already time to move on to the new school year. Autumn has officially arrived, and at this school, Halloween is a total lifestyle. The classroom has been completely transformed into a spooky festival. Sujizono is not having it. Being forced into a cat costume for a kindergarten charity event has her dignity at an all-time low. Yu is practically hypnotized by the sight of her, but the peaceful moment is shattered when a frantic scream echoes from the hallway. The interruption is none other than Karako Kinkira, the student council vice president, who just led a literal army of butlers into the room. She tries to play it off as a uniform inspection, but she eventually breaks. The vice president was just lonely and wanted to be part of the fun. The student council members are showering the vice president with compliments and head pats because she looks absolutely adorable in her hooded costume. But the wholesome vibes vanish when our boy enters the room. He looks like a total monster wearing a tiny pumpkin mask on top of a massive suit. He is actually worried about scaring the guests. But at this point his size alone is already enough to tilt the mood. There is no more time for talk. The door slides open as the children finally reach the entrance. The kids expected a fun party. Instead they find themselves staring up at a literal wall of muscle. The room erupted into absolute chaos. The kids were not seeing a friendly student, they were seeing a nightmare, and their screams were loud enough to shake the entire school. The class went into full damage control mode. They pleaded with the children to calm down, but staring at a massive giant with a pumpkin head was not exactly helping the vibe. One of the girls stepped in with a puppet to try and distract a crying toddler. She complimented the little girl dress, hoping a friendly voice would finally stop the tears. Sujizono is actually being super sweet, making sure to compliment the kids' costumes so they feel like the stars of the festival. But kids are still scared of our boy. Sujizono officially gave him a new nickname. She introduced him as Mako-kun, promising the kids that even though he was built like a tank, she was still the one in charge. The arrival of the teachers and a mountain of candy instantly turned the nightmare into a festival. The surrounding students were left stunned, watching the atmosphere of the room flip in a matter of seconds. Sujizono was trapped in a relentless onslaught of affection, her dignity fading with every blush. While Yu marveled at her ability to handle the crowd, his classmates were already planning to join the fun. The tension finally evaporated as the children found a new hero to follow, leaving Yu's past blunder behind. Yu was finally catching his breath, hoping the absolute chaos from before was officially a thing of the past. He tried to lock in, swearing to be the most wholesome mascot the school had ever seen, despite the kids still losing their minds at his size. That's when he spotted a potential side quest, a lonely girl sitting by herself in the hallway with a picture book. But his attempt at being a friendly giant backfired instantly, sending the poor kid into a total spiral of fear while Yu scrambled to hide his face. And just like that, the vibe shifted from a simple misunderstanding into a literal horror show. Sujizono was keeping a close watch on the room, but her attention immediately drifted toward the back where a lone girl sat apart from the group. Yu was playing it safe by drawing a literal boundary line on the floor. He was terrified of scaring her, but Sujizono wondered if leaving him isolated was the right move. The girl surprised everyone by crossing the line herself. She looked up at the massive pumpkin mascot and asked why he was hiding in the corner instead of joining the party. Yu was caught off guard and decided to be honest. He explained that being alone was just easier for him since he never really learned how to talk to people. He quickly realized that they were both in the same boat. She was just a shy kid who felt overwhelmed by the loud noise, finding comfort in the quiet space he provided. The shy girl finally looks up with a spark in her eyes, asking the giant pumpkin mascot if he wants to play with her. She admits he is still pretty scary, but she appreciates him staying in the corner just to keep her company. Elsewhere in the classroom, the situation is devolving into absolute madness. Kinkira is currently being treated like a literal human jungle gym by a mob of toddlers, and her dignity is fading fast. While the boys think she is a natural with children, she is actually reaching her limit as someone draws on her face. As they draw shit emoji on her face lol. Kinkira has finally reached her breaking point as the toddlers start literally tearing her outfit apart. She lets out a desperate scream for it to end, but the tiny monsters show absolutely no mercy. The local thugs are suffering just as much, with Ganzuki getting his arm chewed on by a particularly aggressive second grader. It turns out that being a sadistic fighter doesn't prepare you for a swarm of hungry children. Sujizono stands at the entrance of Class 3B, completely baffled by the invasion of underclassmen. She watches in silence as her classmates are turned into human jungle gyms and playthings for the kids. The atmosphere shifts instantly as the school's elite figures arrive on the scene. Among the heavy hitters, a mysterious student in a Dracula cape makes it clear that he's only here for a very specific reason. He scoffs at the decorations and the candy, calling the entire Halloween festival a boring event meant only for beginners. For this man, the costumes are just a distraction from his true objective. The school elite have officially lost their patience, demanding to know when this ridiculous costume charade is finally going to end. But the mood shifts instantly as a dramatic declaration echoes through the room, heralding the return of the legendary 4 Muscle Kings. 4 masked challengers suddenly burst onto the scene, directly calling out you as the classroom watches in absolute disbelief. Chaos erupts as the masked intruders begin snatching up hostages, dragging terrified students away before anyone can even think to react. With the festival in total shambles, the stage is set to reveal the dark history behind these mysterious and feared Muscle Kings. This wasn't just some random squad. These guys were the legendary elite who once ruled the school before you took them off the board. The entire room is in total shock. This group was supposed to be history, but they've already grabbed Sujizono and the others to force a confrontation. They never actually accepted their defeat. This isn't just a comeback, it's a revenge tour fueled by a year of bitterness and a thirst for power. Logic doesn't work on people this far gone. With Sujizono as their human shield, they've got all the leverage they need to dictate the terms of this fight. The leader finally lays down the law. Yu has to choose between his pride and his friend's safety, and the pressure is reaching a breaking point. Dracula Revel is not pulling any punches, launching a high kick that should have ended this confrontation right now. But the school elite is about to learn that toys can be just as dangerous as fists when a teddy bear flies into the mix and stops him cold. It is total chaos as a tactical deluge of stuffed animals and toy eyeballs buries every single fighter in the room. These kids have zero respect for school legends, straight up telling the elite Dracula to get lost and stop bothering people. The toddler army has officially launched a full-scale rescue mission to save their friend from the masked intruders. The kids are shaking in their boots, but they refuse to budge from the front lines. The thugs are losing their minds, screaming for the little brats to get out of the way before things get ugly. It is absolute mayhem as a tactical nuke of stuffed animals rains down on the combatants. These legendary fighters are getting completely derailed by a barrage of soft plushies. The whole scene turns into a total fraud when the truth finally comes out. These masked intruders aren't the real legends, they're just cheap imitations looking for clout. To understand how we ended up in this circus, we have to rewind the clock 30 minutes. It came the moment of the resurrection of the 4 Kings of Muscle. What we're actually looking at, a bunch of imposters dressed up as the 4 Kings of Muscle, casually playing with kids while waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Subtle, very subtle. The past is finally behind us, but the present is looking even worse as the fake legend resorts to using hostages as his final shield. He thinks he can hide behind them, but his time is officially up. Out of nowhere, a massive figure enters the frame, and here comes our macho Kun. Yu does not care about their excuses, declaring that they have crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. As his aura flares up, the thugs are left screaming in terror at mysterious flames they cannot even comprehend. With a bone-chilling voice, the pumpkin-headed Yu gives them one final ultimatum. It is the ultimate trick or treat scenario, and since these guys do not have any candy to offer, they are about to get the beating of a lifetime. This is it. Unleashing the most advanced muscle technique in existence, he prepares to end the fight once and for all. With a roar of muscle explosion, the entire scene is about to be consumed by pure, unadulterated power. That is a wrap on the fake Legends rematch as he is sent flying by a massive, bone-shattering explosion. Sakiko stands frozen in shock, watching the entire battlefield get wiped clean in a single devastating blast. The group immediately swarms Sakiko to check for injuries, but she is taking it all with a surprising amount of grace. Sujizono is officially suspicious, wondering how any girl can stay this pure and optimistic after seeing a tactical nuke go off. As the smoke clears, the interrogation begins, but Sujizono is not about to spill any secrets just yet. She hits them with a cryptic smile and a shrug, keeping the true scale of that muscle power all to herself. The festival madness is finally taking its toll, and the infirmary is looking like the next logical stop for this exhausted crew. Sujizono is already halfway there, swooning as she leans into the massive pumpkin giant for some much-needed support. Sujizono finally loses all self-control and buries her face in that glorious, massive muscle mountain. She is officially in her happy place, floating on cloud 9 as she realizes just how soft and powerful this hero really is. Sujizono has officially lost her mind, treating those massive arms like her own personal charging station. Yu is practically begging her to return to her normal self, but with those muscles in reach, she is not going anywhere. She is actually drooling at this point, reciting a list of muscle groups like she's chanting a sacred prayer. This isn't just a crush anymore, it's a full-blown obsession with every single fiber of that monstrous physique. The situation is turning into a literal circus as she gets tossed around like a rag doll while clinging to his arm. She does not care about the laws of physics or her own safety as long as she has a front-row seat to those gains. Against all odds, the mission is a wrap. The exchange went off without a hitch, proving that even a muscle god can hide in plain sight with the right costume. Just when Sujizono thought she had the bicep all to herself, a second girl lunges for his arm and catches everyone off guard. Sujizono is completely frozen in shock as a brand new rival makes her move for the muscle mountain. This girl is pouring her heart out, thanking her pumpkin savior for staying by her side when things got scary. Yu is completely short-circuiting, missing the entire confession because he can't even process what just happened. The festival is finally winding down, but the real chaos is just beginning. Sujizono just lost her exclusive membership to the Muscle Club because a brand new rival has officially joined the obsession. The year was coming to a close and Yu finally worked up the courage to speak his mind. He called out to Sujizono, catching her attention as they walked through the cold. Yu looked incredibly intense, making Sujizono wonder if he was thinking about his gains again. She could tell by his serious expression that he was about to say something big. He finally dropped the question, asking her to join him for the first temple visit of the new year. Sujizono stared back in shock, completely caught off guard by the invitation. Winter vacation was finally starting and the air was freezing. Yu tried to keep warm as he stepped out, his breath turning into mist in the morning chill. Even with a massive winter coat on, his insane physique was impossible to ignore. Someone in the distance immediately recognized those boulder shoulders and called out his legendary title. The local kids are absolutely losing it for Pumpkin Macho, begging him to drop another legendary muscle blast right there on the street. Sujizono catches him in the middle of his mini-fan meeting, appearing totally stunned by his sudden neighborhood fame. It is a rare morning commute for the two of them, but walking next to a human mountain makes it impossible to just blend in with the crowd. Yu is actually feeling pretty wholesome about making the kids happy, while Sujizono realizes that his hero status from Halloween is never wearing off. The peace is immediately shattered when a whole squad of classmates crashes the party, swarming Sujizono and leaving Yu in the dust. The classmates are actually being friendly to the muscle monster for once. Yu even manages a normal greeting to the bubbly Haruko without scaring her off. A few months into the school year and Yu is finally reflecting on his journey. He is no longer just the scary giant in the corner. Even the student council vice president is reaching out to him now. The fear factor is fading though the girls still maintain a respectful 2-meter safety zone. Sujizono can see the shift in the air too. For the first time it feels like Yu might actually belong here. The cold morning air is nothing compared to the warmth of finally being accepted. Yu never dreamed he would have more than one person to talk to at this school. Winter break is finally around the corner and the classroom is absolute chaos. Sujizono is stuck dealing with classmates taking over her desk while Yu watches from a distance, feeling like a normal student for the first time. Seeing everyone so happy brings a rare smile to Yu's face as he reflects on how far he has come. But the peaceful moment is immediately shattered when a booming voice calls out his full name, demanding his attention. A wild new challenger suddenly appears, claiming to be the head of the legendary Killen Temple martial arts family. He screams his challenge to the top muscle monster of the school, backed by what he calls the power of the tiger. Yu just let out a sneeze that would register on a Richter scale. The raw pressure from his massive frame obliterated the classroom windows, sending shards of glass and the new challenger flying as his classmates absolutely lost their minds. But while the room is in total chaos, Yu is just standing there casually complaining about the winter chill. Deciding to ignore the property damage for now, Yu makes his way toward the faculty office. He just wants to get through the rest of the day in peace, but the morning chill is still biting right through his uniform. Yu spots Sujizono standing alone in the school hallway, wondering who she could possibly be waiting for. Yu asks who she is looking for. Since her response is completely vague, he assumes he is just in the way and awkwardly offers a goodbye before starting to head home. Sujizono stops Yu dead in his tracks, dropping the bomb that she has been waiting for him this entire time. Yu's brain instantly melts into a puddle of confusion because he cannot process why she would actually want to see him. But she has a practical mission. Vacation starts tomorrow and she does not even have his phone number yet. He is sweating bullets, screaming in disbelief, while she just stares him down, completely done with his erratic behavior. Pure panic takes over and he launches into a full retreat before she can even finish her sentence. He is already convinced he is being rejected, ignoring her desperate screams as he disappears into the distance. Just as things couldn't get more chaotic, a trio of muscle-bound freaks blocks the path. They are armed with a microphone and a thirst for battle, declaring this the final showdown of the year. Yu doesn't even slow down, slamming into the wall of meat with the force of a freight train. The thugs are baffled as they feel his strange, elastic power absorbing their impact. The pressure finally hits its breaking point. Yu lets out a deafening roar as his muscles expand with enough force to shatter the surrounding air, completely losing control of his monstrous physique. Yu screams his apologies as he flees the scene, leaving the defeated muscle club in his wake. Sujizono is hot on his heels, desperate to stop him before he disappears for good. The chase takes a disastrous turn when Sujizono catches a patch of ice and wipes out hard. Yu is still too deep in his own head to notice his friend face planting into the freezing snow. Yu finally snaps out of his spiral. He sees his friend collapsed face down in the snow, desperately trying to catch her breath after that chase. He is in total panic mode now. He hovers over her with a look of pure distress, already begging to carry her straight to the school infirmary. But she did not track him down just to be rescued. She lunges forward and locks her grip onto him, calling him a dumb macho for trying to bail. She is not letting him hide from this. She knows this was not some casual joke. It was the first time he ever found the strength to be vulnerable. She saw the terror on his face from the very beginning. She understands that for a guy the whole world usually avoids, this confession meant everything. Sujizono is done playing games, and she is forcing you to finally face reality instead of running from his own feelings. She pins him into the snow with total authority, demanding that he stay and see this confession through to the end. Yu finally finds his courage and asks the big question, hoping she will join him for the New Year shrine visit. The silence is heavy as Sujizono looks him dead in the eye, and everything hangs on the next words she speaks. And just before we get any answers, scene cut to Yu's house and Yu's sister makes her grand entrance. Shoko is back and she has gone all out with a festive outfit. Yu is caught completely off guard by his big sister's sudden arrival. Yu is shook seeing Shoka back already, and she immediately grills him for being out so late on Christmas Eve. His mom is vibing with pure holiday joy, serving up a steaming feast while the family finally reunites. The family finally sits down for dinner, but Shoka acts like her return was just a move for her own comfort. Before Yu can even think about changing out of his suit, Shoka stops him cold with an intense gaze. She drops a heavy question about his plans for January 1st, leaving him standing there in total silence. Yu is stunned to find out his sister actually cleared her busy schedule just to spend the holiday with him. Shoka takes the chance to roast his non-existent social life, laughing while offering her pity as his only company. But the tables turn when Yu reveals he is already booked, leaving his sister completely speechless for once. The morning of the shrine visit arrives, and Sujizono makes an entrance, and we finally know her answer was yes. She offers a formal greeting to start the year, marking the beginning of their most important day yet. Yu stands completely frozen as the reality of a brand new year cycles through his head. The peaceful moment is immediately trashed as Sujizono starts laughing at his distressed face. 1 second he is being teased for his macho status, and the next he is a sobbing wreck. He lets out a literal flood of tears, marking the official and chaotic start to their brand new year. Today is January 1st. Yu is kicking off the new year with his first traditional shrine visit alongside Sujizono. Yu cannot help but smile. When he admits he is just happy to be by her side, it catches her completely off guard. She tells him not to say things like that so nonchalantly before rushing ahead to the temple. Yu is left standing there, totally confused by her sudden reaction. A heavy silence falls over them as they trek through the deep snow. Yu tries to break the tension with a laugh, but the mood is starting to feel awkward. They finally reach the main grounds. The temple is absolutely massive, and the sheer scale of the building leaves them both in total awe. The temple grounds are absolutely buzzing. Sujizono is in her element, practically glowing as she takes in the massive crowd and the smell of the food stalls. Yu is just trying to navigate the sea of people in his massive winter gear, doing his best to keep up with her energy. She isn't slowing down for anyone. Sujizono looks back with a grin, telling him they need to move faster or they will be late. She is on a mission to make this holiday perfect, leaving Yu to scramble after her. Sujizono even greets her friends as they pass by, clearly having a great time. Yu is trailing behind, his heart racing as he watches her smile. He just wants to catch up and stay by her side for the rest of the day. But the peaceful vibe is shattered in an instant. A loud laugh rings out as a flamboyant figure suddenly blocks their path. The sight of a decorated kimono and a massive braid stops them both cold, signaling that their quiet morning is over. It is the student council vice president, Kiriko Kinkira, looking as arrogant as ever. She is already starting the year with a roast, calling Yu brave for daring to stand in her presence. She is dressed to the nines and clearly looking to stir up some drama. Sujizono has zero patience for the drama, immediately shutting down the vice president's flashy entrance. Kurako is already in her feelings, screaming that she does not deserve this level of disrespect. Suddenly, a whole maid squad spawns in to defend their lady's honor. They insist Kurako was actually hyped to see them, calling this a rare gesture of friendship that should not be wasted. The pressure is too much for the vice president, and she breaks down into a sobbing mess right on the spot. Her loyal staff just keeps fueling the fire, screaming in agreement while Yu stands there, completely speechless. Despite the chaotic scene, she manages to squeak out a proper greeting through her tears. It is all about maintaining that high-class courtesy, even when you are making a total fool of yourself in public. She finally finishes the greeting, looking absolutely defeated as her maids try to steer her away towards some comfort food. Sujizono just wants her to chill out while they process the weirdness of the moment. Before they can even catch their breath, a new group of absolute powerhouses blocks their path. These aren't just random students, they are the legendary 4 kings of muscle, and their presence alone changes the entire vibe of the shrine. Sujizono is already reaching her limit with all the unexpected company, questioning why the strongest fighters in the school are even bothering to show up today. She's starting to wonder if the 1st of January is just a magnet for bad luck. Yu is just trying to process the situation, but Sujizono is having a total meltdown in the background. Seeing how well the elite fighters seem to get along is catching her completely off guard, leaving Yu totally lost in the confusion. The group finally decides to head off, offering a polite goodbye as they go about their business. Sujizono is still fuming, screaming at them to watch their mouths after they drop a comment about how much she's changed. As the chaos finally dies down, Sujizono admits she's already exhausted from all the social drama. Yu notices that even though they are the strongest in the school, these guys aren't nearly as scary or prejudiced as they used to be. The shrine is absolutely packed, and even the school's heavy hitters are feeling the pressure. Rematch talk is already heating up because graduation is coming fast and nobody wants to leave with a losing record. It has been months since Yu and Sujizono first crossed paths, and standing here together makes the journey feel real. A sudden glance is all it takes to realize just how much ground they have covered since that first day. Yu is having a total meltdown in the background, but Sujizono is not having any of it. She brushes him off with a cold shoulder, keeping her focus steady while the chaos unfolds behind her. Despite all the madness, Yu realized that meeting her was the best thing that ever happened to him. She has brought a kind of genuine happiness into his life that he never thought was possible for someone like him. From dangerous hostage situations to simple daily conversations, they survived it all together. Whether she was protecting him or just losing her temper, every single moment built a bond that finally feels unbreakable. Standing before the gods, Yu makes a silent wish that this connection never fades. He just wants her to stay by his side forever, no matter what happens next. The formal visit is over and Yu is ready to head home. However, the sight of the festival stalls quickly changes the plan, and his quiet evening is about to get a lot louder. She is not ready to call it a night just yet. With a candied apple in her hand, she declares that the party is just getting started, leaving Yu completely overwhelmed by her energy. A sudden voice from behind stops them dead in their tracks. The joy of the festival vanishes in an instant, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated shock. The atmosphere turns ice cold as a familiar presence looms over them. Yu is paralyzed with fear, realized that his peaceful holiday has just turned into a total nightmare. Yu's peaceful night just hit a massive roadblock as his sister Shoka and his mother suddenly show up out of nowhere. He tries to explain that his sister basically dragged their mother here against her will, but Sujizono is too stunned to even process what she is seeing. The tension only climbs higher when Yu's mother finally realizes who he is with, leaving the usually blunt girl totally flustered in the middle of the crowd. After a quick round of greetings, the family finally heads off to find some food, but that brief moment of relief is just the calm before the storm. Suddenly, a literal fishing line snags Sujizono and hauls her into the air while a group of muscle-bound attackers starts laughing at their catch. They call themselves the 7 Muscle Gods, and they did not come here to play. They spent their entire winter break training with one goal in mind, crushing their rivals and taking over the scene. These guys are practically bursting with confidence, laughing as they use Sujizono as bait to force a confrontation. They think they hold all the cards, but their arrogance is about to cost them dearly. That was the final straw. Yu is letting go of every ounce of restraint, his body surging with a level of power that threatens to tear the very ground apart. He is beyond furious, screaming at the top of his lungs about how tired he is of this cycle. He cannot believe these idiots are starting the new year with another kidnapping plot. While her captors are busy shaking in their boots, Sujizono just smiles, completely resigned to another year of this total madness. She knows exactly what happens when Yu gets this worked up, and she is ready to watch the fireworks. Yu is officially peaking. He just dropped the latest evolution of his power to end the year with a massive show of force. It is not just about raw power. This technique psychologically breaks the enemy so they lose the will to fight without a single drop of blood being spilled. The entire crowd is mesmerized. They are not looking at a student anymore but a golden deity that has everyone feeling blessed to even be alive. He has reached the rank of a muscle god. While he feels bad about the scene, Sujizono is busy dying from the pure embarrassment of it all. They are finally heading home after the total insanity. Yu hides his massive frame under a puffer jacket, but they both know the chaos will follow them forever. Yu takes a quiet moment to finally say what is on his mind. He is genuinely grateful for everything they have been through together during this chaotic holiday. He credits her for giving him the strength to accept his own body. It is the kind of heartfelt confession that usually changes the entire dynamic of a friendship. Except she did not hear a single word of it. Sujizono was way too busy admiring his physique to pay any attention to his emotional speech. Some things never change. Even as they prepare to head home, he is still the same gentle giant and she is still his most intense admirer. This is the story of a boy who refuses to give up. No matter how much he struggles or cries, he is determined to keep pushing toward his future. 10 years have passed and Yu is a literal mountain of a man now. Even though he still has issues with his monstrous body, he has finally accepted that it simply cannot be helped. Sujizono calls him forward and he answers her with total confidence. The fear of being rejected is gone because he is not suffering from the pressure of his appearance anymore. Yu declares that this is finally his life. Surrounded by a cheering crowd and falling flower petals, he is stepping into a future that once felt like a complete nightmare. Meeting Sujizono changed his entire world. Their shared laughter is the ultimate proof that every struggle was worth it just to reach this single moment of pure joy. But some things never truly change. Before the ceremony can even finish, Sujizono is snatched up by a helicopter. It seems her life as a perpetual hostage is far from over. That's it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed the story, and if you made it to the end, drop a comment saying Macho-kun. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, as it really helps the channel grow. Until then, don't forget leg day.